States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning, everyone. Our next regular meeting is for Friday, May 27th here at the Community Center at 9 a.m. And I think, Tanya, we will have a budget workshop.
Yes, that'll be our first budget workshop at that meeting.
At that meeting, okay. As always, will everybody please turn off your cell phones and no texting. Before we get started, I'd like to call Dave Halbeck up. Tanya, recognize Dave's service, which will be the first of two presentations. We'll have another presentation for Kurt McCullough next week. So, Tanya. I'll just read this quickly. It's a Sun and Lake Golf and Recreation Community presented to David Halbeck in appreciation for your service as a supervisor of the Sun and Lake of Sebring Improvement District, February 2008 to April 2016. David? Thank you. I would simply add that Dave served at a time when we were in a rather difficult transition from developer control to resident control, and at times he was the Lone Ranger on a board that was pretty much made up of developer-supported supervisors. So he saw some tough times, and he also helped to guide us into better times. So thank you again, David. Okay, we have a consent agenda. And do I have a motion? Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, any board comment?
No.
Any public comment? Bring it back to the board. Chrissy, call the roll, please.
Supervisor Holbert?
Approve.
Supervisor Gilpin?
Yes.
Supervisor White?
Yes.
President Miller?
Yes. Okay, action agenda. Our first item is resolution number 2016-05-12-13-21, and that is a resolution to award RFP 1605 for the Ponce de Leon Sidewalk Project to Dallin Real Estate Development Corporation for $99,721. Need a motion, please?
I'll make that motion. Second.
Okay, board comment.
I had a question, but Gator answered it.
So that's it for that.
Yep. I'm just tickled that it come in under budget, and it looks like we should be able to get 50% from the county.
Is that Dalen? Is that how you pronounce it?
Dalen.
And it's Dalen Real Estate Development Corporation. It's kind of an interesting title for sidewalk construction.
They are a local company.
They are what?
They're local. They're from Sebring.
Okay, very good. Do we have any public comment on this? Pardon me? No.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Yeah. Where's these sidewalks going?
Joe, they're going on ponds from Miranda down to the circle.
How many square feet is that going to be?
Square feet? I'm not sure. Linear feet?
6,000.
Do we? I don't know. All I can tell, we had it in our bid documents, but why?
Well, it looks to me like I had over 50 years in construction and everything like that, but the way prices gone up and everything. It seemed to me this for a sidewalk is out of bounds on the price of what they are charging there. Yeah,
it was done in competitive bidding, and
how many bids did you have?
we had either 2 or 3. What was it?
We had 2.
We had 2 bids, and the other bid was Excavation Point, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, and so it was advertised in bid.
Mm-hmm.
Sidewalks, if you remember all the other sidewalks that we've done when we had the county grant over there in your area, and then of course we had along Sun Lake Boulevard, that's a very, very expensive linear foot cost. It was then, it is now. But I believe these people were 10 to 15% under the other bidder.
No, I wasn't at any of the meetings to find out about it, so I was curious to know about it. Thank you.
Okay.
Joe, you asked about the feet. It's 2,925 feet of sidewalk, 5 foot wide, and I think there's quite a little bit of dirt work in that, and some extension of culverts in that also.
Oh, there's always that in there, no matter what. Just like your sign out there, they say where the electrician and all that water and all that. They forgot to figure that in there. Now we're sitting back holding, waiting on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Bill Jackson, resident. How did we choose to go from Miranda up to the circle? It seems like most of the housing is from the circle down the other way.
You mean south of Sun Lake?
Wow.
Well, we did that project. One of the main reasons that we did it was all of the residents in that neck of the woods were very concerned about the conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians. A lot of people use that for jogging and other. We also had the situation with the school kids as well. So it was a project that evolved over some time and was supported by all the people in that area by petition, and it was needed, is needed.
Is this the one where the grant was given to us, the money by the county, part of it anyway, 4 or 5 years ago?
No, that's all finished. That was the Granada work and so forth.
Okay.
Now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, don't we have a chance to recover 50% of this project?
We hope so. The meeting with the County Recreation, Parks, and Advisory Committee is next Wednesday, so we hope that is the case.
There is that possibility.
Isn't that wonderful?
Hey, Bill, and there is 40-some kids walking that sidewalk twice a day to the school. So there's no place to walk other than down Ponce de Leon, which is pretty high traffic area and fairly quick on that for some reason.
Thank you.
All right, bring it back to the board. Chrissy?
Supervisor Gilpin,
Yes.
Supervisor White,
Yes.
Supervisor Holbert, President Miller.
Yes.
I'm sorry. President Miller.
Yes. Okay, item number 2 is a resolution to obtain road resurfacing services by piggybacking on an agreement between Excavation Point and the City of Avon Park. I need a resolution, please. Motion?
Make a motion.
And I'll second that.
Okay, comments from the board. Okay, I investigated this from the standpoint of not just the Avon Park situation, but other jurisdictions. I did have a long talk with Julian about their contract and the services provided. I also talked with the road and bridges guy down at Okeechobee County, and their contractor is Lynch Construction, and Lynch was one of the bidders on our previous job. And if you remember the resurfacing history here, we did have, I believe 2 years ago, it was a county situation. The county will not bid in competition. They are less expensive in terms per price per ton, but at the same time we had some problems with the consistency of the thickness of what they were laying down. So you can have a cheaper per ton price, and you could have a higher overall price if you're exceeding the specifications. But basically, I think last year we bid it out. We had 4 bidders. Excavation Point won that bid, and the next lowest bid to them was, again, Lynch, but they were 16.5% higher. Do you remember the price per ton of that? I think it was around, was it 117?
For Lynch or the county? The county was around 114 or 115 per ton. The bid was in linear fee. We had discussed that. I don't have the tonnage amount, but I think, Peter, do you have that information with you?
Anyway, to make a long story short, checking with all the various tonnage situations, Lynch is at 113 down at Okeechobee. At Avon Park, they're 106, which is actually lower than what we had last year. So both communities, and Sebring is piggybacking on Avon Park as well. And in both cases, high marks were received in terms of the performance of Excavation Point. So it seems like it's a very, very reasonable way to go. With that, I'll turn it over to any public discussion.
Tom Costy, resident. Anytime a construction project is bid, many factors come into play, much more than a unit price that somebody quotes for units of work as needed. 2 or 3 different contractors looking at a project will notice different things. They'll balance that with what their workload is, what their situation is with regard to their manpower, and et cetera. And bids can be all over the place. I don't believe that the piggybacking issue was ever really intended for construction work. For the most part, it's intended for purchasing commodities like office equipment, vehicles, etc. But for construction work, I'd just like to read a couple of comments from other communities with regard how they view the use of piggyback contracts. For instance, Manatee County, this is from an article in the Herald Tribune in Sarasota. They had quite a controversy several years ago with regard to some favored contractors getting work year after year. And we pretty much have this situation with Excavation Point. You might recall that in spite of our very experienced district engineer having estimated the ditch excavation over here in the ABC streets, Excavation Point came in. Actually, they placed an additional bid that was about 30% over the engineer's estimate, and at the last minute they increased their bid to where it was about 60% over the initial estimate, and they were given that contract without competition. I believe our engineer is experienced enough to know what that type of work should cost, but in spite of that, we approved going to these people and giving them...
Tom, excuse
me.
I believe that project was bid and we had one bidder on that, so...
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. But that doesn't change the fact that somebody loaded their bid possibly knowing that he was the only bidder on the job. But my point is this: Manatee County, for example, limits piggyback contracts to a few per year, and the county's top purchasing manager said he avoids using piggybacking for services. He uses them for purchasing commodities. Further, in that analysis over there, a gentleman by the name of Mark D. Rayford, the purchasing manager for the city of Lakeland and the vice president of the Florida Association of Public Purchasing Officers, said local governments should almost always try to secure a contract through competitive bid process first. This piggybacking process with regard to services does save time of staff members from having to go out for bids. But you're always going to get your best price if you go out for bids on a project. You're not going to get them from a list of unit pricing that's the same as somebody goes out and fills a couple of potholes with several thousand pounds of asphalt, and then compare that to resurfacing a mile of road. It just doesn't make sense to do it that way. Purchasing officials from Charlotte and DeSoto counties also say they generally do not use piggybacking to pay for services. Manatee County Purchasing Director Robert Cuthbert said he uses piggyback just a few times a year, and those contracts usually involve buying goods through a regional or statewide consortium. He said he is so wary of piggyback contracts that he cannot remember the last time the county approved one. Cuthbert and other purchasing directors say they prefer competitive bids because they have more checks and balances. When a project is put out to bid, the requirements are posted on the internet, and interested businesses have a chance to comment and ask questions. Proposals are submitted, they are ranked by county staff, and somebody gets the job. The competition makes things slower and messier, but it also limits the power of a few staff members. Excavation Point has gotten well over $1 million worth of work over the last several years in here. They're probably our largest vendor, I think, in terms of dollar volume. And to have them get this on the basis of a piggybacking quote that they submitted to Avon Park last year, and do it on the basis of a dollar amount per ton, when if you look at the photos that are in in this resolution, you'll see that there are numerous potholes. There's areas where the base is going to have to be repaired and built up before the asphalt goes down. This is more than just putting down tons of asphalt. Thank you.
Rusty Crano, resident. I don't agree with Tom Costi in not using the piggyback method. A lot of I'm talking from Dade County experience in the purchasing, because you can use the piggyback as also, it doesn't stop you from doing competitive bidding. But to totally not use the piggyback, I think it would be a disservice, because I think this has already been vetted as far as the piggyback price is concerned, and it's already been looked into. So if that's the lowest price, then I think it makes the other people, the vendors, become a little bit more competitive. So I think you eliminate the competition. But I'm all for using piggyback buying, even in services.
Joe, are you going to speak?
Joe Eck again. I'm not going to go into this thing like they're doing, but all I want to know is this similar to what we had done in Unit 2, is what you're talking about? There about 3 to 5 years ago, we redone it.
Yeah, it was at least 5 years ago. They did that. The microservicing is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I think it was competitively bid, but I'm not sure.
But I'm talking about the surface they're going to be doing, is it?
No. That microservicing was sort of a cheap date type of thing that was supposed to last 3 to 5 years, and we've gotten away from that. That was, unfortunately, a grease shaver special.
Yeah. So
we have the same thing.
Yeah, you said it right, too, cheap. And that's what it's doing. It's falling apart down there now. Thank you.
I should just say for the record that Avon Park does their own potholes with their in-house crew, and their contract with Excavation Point includes resurfacing, which is what we're concerned about. No further public comment.
President Miller, there is one thing I wanted to bring up. There's a minor change in the resolution from when it was attached to the board packet. We discovered that the Avon Park contract that we're piggybacking off of, well, it is a February 2016 contract. The actual bid is past the 12-month allowable look-back period. However, there was a bid in October of 2015, which is within the 12-month period, to the county, Highlands County, where Excavation Point bid, I believe, was over $110, but Excavation Point has agreed to honor this $106 price for us.
So what is the change in specifically?
There's an extra whereas clause because we're still piggybacking on this contract, but it's because it's less than what we could have used with the 12-month look-back period.
Tanya, I have a question for you. Is there a certain thickness that this mat has to be put down?
I think 1 inch. Is that correct on the asphalt?
Well, that
at a minimum. That's a minimum.
Depth is laid down according to standards for various type of roads, and it can vary anywhere from 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches. That was one of the problems that I believe Mr. Costi pointed out months ago with the county. He was concerned that the resurfacing depth was not consistent. So it's not just, as it was said, it's not just a matter of a price per ton. It's what you negotiate, and that, in effect, what you're doing is you're starting at that point, and you're negotiating a specific work order, which takes into account the depth, price, and so forth, and you come up with a specific figure for that project, the same way that you would with competitive bidding. Okay. Any further comments from the board regarding this? Okay, Chrissy, call the roll.
Supervisor White?
Yes.
Supervisor Holbert?
Yes.
Supervisor Gilpin?
Yes.
President Miller?
Yes. Okay, next item is Resolution 2016-05-13-23, and that is a resolution to appoint a new supervisor to fill the seat vacated by David Halbeck for the remainder of his term pursuant to Section 9107 Highlands County Ordinances. We'll need a resolution, please, or a motion.
So moved.
Second. Okay. Open for board discussion and nominations. We have, I believe, 3 candidates, and all 3 candidates have indicated their interest in writing. So we will have board comments and nominations. We'll have public comment, and we'll bring it back to the board. So, gentlemen.
I nominate Wally Edgell to fill the vacancy for supervisor for the remaining time.
Do I have a second?
You have a second.
Okay, I'll ask for nominations. We have three candidates.
I don't have any other nominations.
No further nominations from the board. Okay, any public discussion? Bring it back to the board. Chrissy?
Supervisor Holbert,
Yes.
Supervisor Gilpin,
Yes.
Supervisor White,
Yes.
President Miller,
Yes. Okay, I think we can bring Mr. Edgell up and swear him in at this time.
I, Wally Edgell,
I, Wally Edgell,
a citizen of the state of Florida
a citizen of the state of Florida
and of the United States of America,
and of the United States of America,
and being an officer of the Sun and Lake of Sebring Improvement District,
and being an officer of the Sun and Lake of Sebring Improvement District,
Board of Supervisors,
Board of Supervisors,
and a recipient of public funds,
and a recipient of public funds,
do hereby solemnly swear
do hereby solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the Constitution
of the United States
of the United States
and the state of Florida,
and the state of Florida,
and that I will honestly,
and that I will honestly,
faithfully,
faithfully,
and impartially perform
and impartially perform
the duties entrusted to me
the duties entrusted in me
while in office as Supervisor of the Sun and Lake
as Supervisor of the Sun and Lake
of Sebring Improvement District,
of Sebring Improvement District,
Board of
Board of
Supervisors,
Supervisors,
and will not neglect
and will not neglect
any duty
any duty
imposed upon me
imposed upon me
by law.
by law.
Oh, you want to take your seat? He's running away already. Well, I certainly want to welcome you to the board, but I would also like to thank our other two applicants that expressed their interest. We've gone too long in this district with just having one person per seat per election, and it was kind of refreshing to me that we had more than one person interested in this position. While I will hold this until November election, I would remind everybody that there are two popular election seats in play this year. Registration for that, or qualification, I guess, registration for that is at the county election office, and that is from, I believe, June 20th to June 24th, if anybody is interested for the full term, starting in November. And there's two, Mr. Hulbert's seat is up, and of course, Mr. Edgell's seat is up. Okay, our last item on the action agenda is a discussion of our code enforcement policy changes. And Tanya, will you take us through that, please?
Bob Pritt, the attorney with City of Naples, is not here yet. Can we move on to staff reports and attorney reports, and then maybe go back as soon as he should be here between 10 and 10:15?
We did move rather quickly this morning, didn't we? Okay. We'll come back to that when he arrives. There's no add-on items?
No.
We have petitions and communications, and the board just received this morning a very, very nice note from Patty Stange thanking us for recognition of her husband Larry, and it was well deserved. And Patty, you've been a very positive force and participant, and we thank you very much for that note. And I'll pass that to all the board members. So, okay, we have the general manager's report.
Did you want to move into staff reports first for golf?
My golly, I missed that, didn't I? Sure didn't want to miss the golf report. Jim around? Mr. Kurtzborn? Mr. Billy Casper?
Jim Kurtzborn, General Manager, Sun and Lake Golf Club, Billy Casper Golf. Excuse me. We're moving into our summer season now and starting to focus on the golf course. Also starting to look at our budget preparation for next year. We've put in line as our top goals. Our number one goal is the golf course, to focus on its continued improvement. Our number two goal is member recognition and value, which is to boost the value of being a member at Sun and Lake and improve the recognition. Our third goal is our restaurant facility to research better ways to better service our members and our guests. And our fourth goal is data capture, which is to capture all the data necessary to analyze not only our business but our division of our memberships, to understand how the cost of each different membership classification is affected by the amount of play of that classification. Relative to we had our golf committee meeting last Tuesday, addressed a lot of our normal issues, but also went out onto the golf course to look at our summer plans for improving the golf courses. We have what I would consider the normal focus of working on your core course of your tees, fairways, and greens. But our biggest initiative this summer is to address, I guess you would say, the holes, washouts, all the irregularities that are in the roughs at the end of the cart pass. And then in addition to that, to address on Deer Run the 4 holes where I would say either the roughs are in exceptionally bad shape or the design of the golf course lends itself to having the golfer play from the rough. I think a good example of that would be hole number 12 on Deer Run, where it's a sharp dogleg left, and just my personal estimation from being out there a couple hours, more players play from the right rough than play from the fairway. So that's an area that we're going to add some irrigation heads to that side, because that rough area there isn't irrigated, and then we're going to address it with fertilizer and sod and whatever's needed to bring that area, I wouldn't say not quite up to the level of a fairway area, but to make it a very playable area. The other area that I think is well below, that's really a poor description, but well below par is the 14th hole on Deer. On both sides, those rough areas are frankly in awful shape. The left rough has even been exacerbated by the fact that we lost probably our biggest, nicest tree on the property there, a monument tree down about 125 yards from the green adjacent to the trap. We lost about a quarter of the tree, and for safety reasons couldn't save the tree, which would have been, it was our top goal, but you can't avoid the safety reasons. Beyond that, I think that covers our operational. We do have a lot of initiatives for June in the restaurant. We enacted the birthday club that we've got going already for people that are residents in Sun and Lake, either the day of their birthday or the day before or after. They can come in and have a complimentary birthday dinner when they have someone with them who's also having an entree. In June, we've got 3 initiatives that we're starting. First, we're going to start Member Mondays. So every Monday in June, the members can come in and have dinner. It'd be buy one, get one, the second one at half off. One Tuesday a month, it's actually, I believe, the second Tuesday, we're going to do a kids' night where we bring in kids' entertainment and do half-off kids' meals to try to bring in the residents and have them come in and understand that it's also their restaurant. And then on Thursdays for the month of June, we're going to do Residents Thursdays, which will be a buy one, get one free for entrees Thursday night. So we're looking to pack the restaurant and try to get some residents into the restaurant that either have never been there, or to try to get the residents to understand that they can, frequent the restaurant and get a good value and a great product. Beyond that, any questions on that? Anything before I move into the March financials?
Jim, I have a question. Is there a policy now when we have a washout or something like that around the green or in a sand trap, that once it's seen, is that fixed now, or do we hold that off until the summer and fix it then?
I guess it's gonna matter based on the severity of the washout. First, if it's a safety issue, it should be addressed immediately. One of the difficulties in the off season is that the turf doesn't grow well, so it's not really a situation where you're going to repair it with sod and then the sod is going to grow well. So right now is basically where we really make 95% of our progress and our repairs. So this is actually this month up to now, and the next couple weeks is really a difficult time, for me, because you want to get at the golf courses, but we, being in Central Florida, our biggest pest of the golf course is a nematode. It's an insect that feeds on the roots of grasses, most specifically Bermuda grasses. It's expensive to treat those. You treat them with a liquid that turns into a gas, and after you've treated, if you do anything to the turf, it actually lessens the effectiveness of the treatment. So they recommend for 3 weeks that you don't go out on the golf course and disturb the turf. So we're definitely itching to get at, the ends of the cart paths, those holes, and a lot of things that need to be addressed now and also need to be looked at for future preventative maintenance. We do have, when our regional agronomist came, we did ask him about best practices for bunkers specifically, because that's a lot of the areas that we're seeing, for lack of a better word, decay on the golf course. We did get a best practices from him. He said he had one course that actually had much better bunkers, and kind of to our surprise, I think the secret sauce from the better practice that we got was insect treatment right next to the bunkers. When they apply the curfew, which is slit injected, they have to be about 8 feet away from the bunkers to not cave the bunkers in, and so that area ends up weakening. So it's been about 6 weeks since Mike Stephen, our agronomist, was in, so we've started those treatments. In the next month, we'll go to the worst areas, which there's 5 or 6 that I can think of that are in awful shape, where we can get sod and restore those areas. And then with preventative treatment, that really shouldn't happen again now that we've figured that out. So I don't know if that specifically answered your question,
yes,
but we are ready. We're ready to jump on it.
I have a question for you, Jim. With Turtle Run being closed down for about 4 weeks, have you got a full crew out there doing the other things, or where are you standing with the crew?
Yes. Well, right now we do have a full crew on Turtle Run based on the way the curfew is running. We've to date, just for this week, we're done with the roughs mowed out. We've got the Bahia mowed out, and next week to move in more to the special projects, since we're starting to get past the 10th day or 11th day since we've had the curfew, to start to focus on the other initiatives. The goal for the summer is to take our roughly 20-person crew and bring in a few high school/college kids to add about 3 people to the crew, but to divide the crew basically into about thirds. A third of the crew would be to take care of deer. A third would be to take care of Turtle Run, and then to have a third of a crew for special projects to get all these holes filled, and then initiate the irrigation plan to get irrigation to these rough areas. So it's a big project. We also plan on involving, like last Tuesday, we were actually out on the course for probably an hour and a half, with the golf committee. Explaining something is one thing, but actually being able to show people something is a total different thing. So on number 2 of Deer Run, when you drive up there, it's one of the few times that the cart path is actually as high as the tee. And we're going to address it next year, but it's actually embarrassing to see the blue and black tee, how bad it is. But if you realize that the laws have been relaxed this year, so we're hoping to get some forgiveness. But up until this year, they've never been able to curfew the blue and black tee because the house being right there. And you can definitely see where they've been able to curfew and where they haven't been able to curfew to deal with this nematode. So we're going to have to aggressively, we're probably going to have to resod that back tee, and then find a way, if we still can't apply curfew, to either out-fertilize the nematodes or do something to deal with that area because it's so visible. But bringing the golf committee out there and having them actually see that, words now become pictures and ideas. So I think it was very productive. We're going to go out at least once a month, actually in the months of August and September. For lack of a better way to do it, we'll give each of the committee members 5 to 10 flags where they can just go put the flag wherever they want, and that would be an area that we would address, for holes or different things such as that. So, hopefully we can get about 80% of those areas, 100% of the drastic areas, and then continue this program for a couple of years to have, to even address the little areas that we wouldn't get to this year, like an area in the fairway that might have had an irrigation blowout 5 years ago and it's just a little dip, that I wouldn't say is unacceptable, but it's not desirable. But I would say in a couple years it would be our goal to get all those. We do have, when you look at the golf course, our big priority for this coming year is to have viable temporary tees, especially for the red, gold, and white tees. We're playing many more players than is recommended in that area, so our goal is to have as many temporary tees as possible, do a 3-week interval on the regular tees, and then a 1-week interval on the temporary tees. Not doing those all at once, but doing them in a rotation and trying to match it up so there's a equal number of forward temporary tees with an equal number of back temporary tees. One of the things that we probably were overly conservative on would be areas like on hole number 13 of Deer, which is a par 3, and the tee has never been good, but it probably couldn't have been worse than it was this year. We hesitated to move the white tee back, really to the blue tee area where the grass was. We've talked to the golf committee, and next year we're not going to do that. If a tee gets into a stress situation, we're going to move the tee to grass, even if it's going to alter the length of the golf course, and we'll try to make up for it for other holes. So we might have a situation where one hole's playing 20 yards longer than normal, and we'll try to find a temporary tee on another hole to play at 20 yards shorter. It is our number one request for capital for next year to have a tee rebuilding, project to address those forward tees that are a third of the size that the USGA recommends. Our other big capital item is a fertigation system. And that's just basically part of the new technology. When you don't overseed, you struggle for 60 to 75 days during the season when it gets colder. And Bermuda grass has trouble absorbing any nutrients, especially a granular, but it absorbs liquid much easier. And so with the fertigation system, you can actually put fertilizer in your irrigation, and then basically, every night, and it's not really every night, you actually wait for the warm spells. And when you have a warm spell that's predicted for the week, you put the fertigation out at the beginning of that week. Then the plant's able to absorb the nutrients and make it through the next
Jim,
75
I
days.
think some of these things you're mentioning are going to come up in terms of the budget development process. So let's save it for that. Let me ask you about surveys. You've got the survey by the Golf Committee for turtle. Is that correct?
Yes, we have it for turtle and deer.
And for deer?
Yes.
Okay. Is that going to be made available to the board?
Sure. Mr. Supervisor White is tabulating the survey.
And then you've done an overall survey request, Survey Monkey
yes,
format.
Yeah.
When is that going to be ready?
We're taking the responses till the end of the month, and then we'll be distributing those to the supervisors and, the results to the supervisors and the members.
Okay. I had a chance to look at an interim result. I noticed you were very limited on the responses, the write-ins. I would hope when you finish the entire survey, we'll have more comments given to us on that. Final question. The specials, all the specials that you ran through for the restaurant, how many of those are available to the general public?
At this point, we haven't done the specials to the general public. The Tuesday nights is going to be available to the general public with the kids' nights once a month. But our initial focus was for the residents and to see what kind of response we get from that. We are heavily advertising. You've seen the billboard probably. And as a side note, the north entrance looks great, and the billboard's right there advertising the sunset menu. We've got the sunset menu advertised down at the Olive Garden, and we're going to start doing some outreach. But for June, to answer your question, which is a good idea, we can look to turn our focus in July to beyond our residents.
Well, I would think over the summer months, we depend quite a bit on outside participation, don't we, in the dining room?
Oh, yes. We always do. Our revenue in the dining room, I believe, is approximately 50-50, maybe 60-40.
I would certainly hope that you would target some of your marketing to that general public as well.
No, that's a good idea. We were trying to do the residents first and spend our money there, or give the discounts there.
That's fine, and certainly members and residents should receive our first priority, but we also recognize we're dependent on outside clientele as well. You said something about financial, you were going to...
Yes, sir. We did have what I would term a weak March. Relative to year over year, we have been experiencing great growth in our restaurant numbers as far as overall revenue. When I went back to 2013, we had $888,000. For that fiscal year 12-13, we had $1,088,000 for 2014, and I believe we had $2,196,000 for 2015. We're trending very close to that 2015 number, but we are behind at a percent or two. Our market research has indicated that this is a down year for everybody, that 6 to 8% is relative what people are running down. When we looked at the March results, it's interesting when Easter fell where it fell, how it affected different things. So you actually would think that Easter falling in March would have helped your revenue, but it didn't in this case. We only have our draft financials for April, but April has bounced back approximately as much as March was down. But to get into specifics, we did budget for growth in the restaurant that we haven't gotten. So we are running relative to budget for the restaurant. We're $10,000 behind.
Yeah, but the thing that caught my eye was the fact that we're significantly up on our expenditures in the restaurant. And we're running a $40,000 deficit at this time. You mentioned April. Well, we don't have April. All we have is March. So let's talk about
No, I understand.
About that.
Well, through March, the things, well, in specifically March, when you look at the budget, was a much worse month than it was relative to the prior year. So the budget's, well, we see a lot of up and down. So March, we were about 25,000 behind in budget. The preliminaries for April is that we're about 15,000 ahead, and then May we're already behind again. So it's just been kind of an up and down situation. But when you basically look at the expenses for the F&B, primarily the expenses that are up, which is, I wouldn't say this is a budgeting mistake, but kind of a shortfall, is that we're putting our equipment rental into our expenses. So if we have an outside event and we spend, which we have so far this year that was unbudgeted, $3,500 on renting tables and chairs, and most of that stuff is re-rented at a profit, that goes into an expense line item. So it falsely makes it look like your expenses are going up. Really, the only expense that we're actually struggling with, and I wouldn't say struggling with, is we adjusted the island view a lot this season to accommodate when the golfers came in. So many times we'd bring banquet tables in there and other tables that aren't designed to not have linen on them. And so we dressed all those tables, so we did incur extra expense for that linen expense. But all in all, we're basically, we're only $1,000 or $2,000 over year budget.
Well, we're heading into our lean period. I guess my overall question to you, it does not look to me as we're going to do as well this year as we've done in previous years. Am I right or wrong on that?
I would say we're always hopeful, but I would say that's a correct observation. We've, felt pressure from the economy with overall sales, and we're definitely on the outside activities feeling pressure from, they've opened a wedding venue in Lake Placid, which is about 20 to 25% less expensive than we are, and we have lost 4 or 5 weddings that have come and looked at us and gone there. But overall, at the end of the year, we should far exceed our results from 13 and 14. But right now, the 14-15 fiscal year definitely is a high watermark for the restaurant. And while I think we could end up hitting that mark, because you never know when it would be banquet driven, or if we would get a big outpouring from the local residents to come in during the summer.
You, I think in conversations that we've had apart from today, you've indicated, because there's always this conflict between our residents utilizing the club on certain days versus outside events that take the entire club. You indicated to me, I believe, that over the course of the year, that occurs 12 to 15 times. Is that a correct estimate?
Well, it is just an estimate. I will have at the next meeting and make it available what the number of times for the last 12 months was, and also we'll do an analysis of the revenue of those 12 days as opposed to if we were just open for regular business. One of the things we don't want to inconvenience the members if it's not going to be a big benefit to the club. So one of the things...
That's what I'm getting at. And you will target those, that description to the time of the year. Because,
yes, sir.
Obviously, during our snowbird season, we have a lot more patronage among our residents and temporary residents, seasonal residents, than at other times. So it'd be good to have that complete profile and see where we are.
Yes. So, for example, if we have a function on Thursday, February the 19th, we'll take the revenues and expenditures from that day and compare it against an average of the previous Thursday, which would be the 12th, and the next Thursday, that's the 26th, to determine how that affected the club.
Well, there has to be some reasonable limits on that, and also I assume you'll have alternative suggestions of how we can perhaps improve our capacity and so forth.
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you, Jim.
You bet.
Okay, General Counsel report.
For litigation, the Griffin matter, there was a meeting on May 11th regarding, which is basically just procedural to set forth how the things are going to proceed. I have not received a update from Mr. Koji yet at this point. As you know, there's a large information request that he's submitted to us, and I know that we're in the process of getting that information to him. Regarding Ayala, I just actually this morning received an email regarding the deposition of the Ayalas from Roper & Roper, and I've got a call into them for an update as to how that is progressing. Mr. McClure's deposition is still scheduled for June 1st, but hopefully by the next meeting I'll have a definitive update from Roper & Roper as far as the parties that have settled.
How many plaintiffs are left after a few of those settled?
I know that there's both types. We have those that have negligence and intentional claims, and then we have those that are just intentional claims. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I believe it's somewhere around 10. But like I say, I should have a better update at the next meeting once I've had a chance to consult with Roper & Roper. Foreclosures, we did have a foreclosure sale that actually went through this past week on Valentine. My recollection, I think there was over $7,000 in assessments owed, but if I recall correctly, the bid for the property was over $20,000. It was bought by a local, developer. But I believe that the district will see over $9,000 worth of money coming back because of all the court costs and attorney's fees that were involved in that foreclosure. And we're still getting calls from the demand letters that we sent out about potential settlements. So things are progressing.
In your foreclosure process, most of the time you still had people in the house. Is that correct?
It depends, but yeah, in this instance we did. In fact, the property owners, it was not a homestead property. They had renters in there, and were collecting rent and refusing to remit any of it to the district. So, actually, we had to have a writ of possession issued yesterday, or at least requested from the court yesterday, to get those renters out, so that the person, the entity that bought the home, could get in and start their renovations.
Well, I'm just curious. The census time. They try to take April 1st as the date that they go around and say whether it's vacant or whether it's occupied and so forth. Do we have a scorecard on that from your standpoint of what's in progress and so forth?
Not that I'm aware of, but I can look into that.
I have one final question. It may be my ignorance, I don't know, but when we moved the past budget, I think we've done so on an overall basis. Is that correct, or do we do it fund by fund?
let's say generally the actual action items that are taken that I recall is there's a proposed budget, that's step one, and then there's any adjustments that get made, and then the proposed budget gets voted on and approved, and if approved, then the final budget gets voted on and approved.
Well, I guess I'm asking, we have three funds, right? We always discuss, we always propose, and so forth. Yet we don't, I think, vote on each of those funds. We have to vote on the overall budget, and I'm just wondering, is that really the best way? I know in the past I've had reservations about certain aspects, and I would prefer to express an opinion in terms of a vote, but then you have the overall budget, so you got 98%, you agree with. Mm-hmm. But is there any reason we can't vote fund by fund?
Aside from that we haven't done it before, I mean, I can look into it. I don't know why we couldn't do it. The board can kind of do what it wants to do. I'll look and see if there's any reason or anything that would prevent.
I'm just asking that could perhaps give us a little bit more focus on different parts of what we're addressing here as a community.
I'll look into it.
Gentlemen, any further questions? All right, now we're General Manager's report.
Speaking of budget, I wanted to provide you a tentative schedule for our budget discussions. May 27th, following the regular meeting, we'll have budget workshop number 1. On June 24th, following the regular meeting, we will have budget workshop number 2. Of course, these are all proposed, and this is going through the calendar. July 14th, we have a community budget forum presentation. It's an evening meeting. That is a meeting that was scheduled by the board several months ago, so that's July 14th. August 26th, we'll have budget workshop number 3. And then September 9th is the tentative budget adoption that David just spoke about. That's where we will also approve any rate changes, whether it's golf, whether it's utility, recreation, all those rates will be approved at that meeting. And then the final budget adoption, September 23rd. All these are regular meetings with the exception of July 14th. Any questions?
What was the first meeting in September?
September 9th.
9th.
The districts, we've collected our assessment revenues at 90% of budget through March 31st. So we're on track. I know last year with our assessments, we did not collect, close to budget. It was we've collected 95%, I think, last year. But so far we're on track on our assessment revenues. And I'd like to update the board on some of our projects. Duke Energy was scheduled to install a temporary line at the Sun and Lakefront entrance yesterday. This is so we can install the brand new signage that was, created by Don Bell. Don Bell wants to be here next week to install the sign, but as of yet, I do not have an update from Duke Energy on why they were not here yesterday. So what they're going to do is, we have a conflict of the height of the line. So what they're going to do is move a temporary service for the Florida Hospital sign. So I don't have an update as of yet. So hopefully they will be installing that temporary line today.
David, this has been going on, and it's not the first time that we've sat there twiddling our thumbs while Duke decides, well, I'll come when we feel like it. Is there any recourse that we have to put some reasonable pressure on these guys to
not that I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, it's not like they've contracted to do it by a specific time. I don't have a good answer for that, unfortunately.
What about getting a hold of one of our legislators or even the governor and see if we can't get some heat put on these people?
considering that.
That's definitely an option. I mean, I can write a strongly worded letter, but they're Duke Energy. They've kind of got a bit of a monopoly going.
I think it'd do more good if it came from one of our congressmen, would it? I mean, they're going to try to run a rate increase through one of these days, and they kind of like to have those people on their side when they do.
The temporary line that I spoke of is temporary. It's not a permanent solution. They cannot design and confirm what exactly needs to be done at that front entrance. So it was finally agreed upon on the temporary service. So until we get a final confirmation, and we don't even have a cost yet, then this temporary service will it will have to do for now. I mean, that's all I have. As soon as they do have a final design for me and a cost, I'll bring that to the board later. So I have budgeted some money in the next year's budget for that. So I don't know if it's going to be now or later or what Duke is thinking. I really don't have a lot of answers. It's very frustrating.
Well,
to get
sitting there with an
finished.
empty hole and nowhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of that, I believe we asked Bell to replace the circle sign that was destroyed by that drunk driver.
Yes.
Is that ready to be installed?
Yes. They'll bring that with them.
You mean they'll bring it?
They'll bring it when they bring the front entrance sign. They'll bring the circle sign as well and do the install.
While we're still young, please.
While we're still young.
Go ahead. Anything else?
The Racket Club restrooms are progressing, and Mike Hurley is performing daily on-site inspections for that project. The North End Drainage Project, it's progressing fine. The pond work is done up there. You've seen a lot of activity up there. You see a lot of pipes and other things that are installed next to the new sign. We're waiting. They're not installed. I'm sorry. They're still above ground, but they're getting all their equipment lined up and all the everything lined up to actually install the new water line up there. So I should have an update from Excavation Point next week on that project. The maintenance facility, the final site plan was approved by Highlands County yesterday, and we should have final site plans completed by June 1st. So we're wrapping up just a few things on the building itself, and then we should be able to put that out for bid.
Okay, a couple of questions on that, but Larry, go ahead.
One question on that. Is any of that piping or the culverts go underneath the roads that we're going to resurface?
Excavation Point, the road at the intersection at Ponce and US 27, that road will be dug up right there. And there's going to be new water line installed underneath it. But as far as the remaining part of Ponce, I don't know if there's any other culverts. There's no other culverts on Ponce.
What I was asking, if the resurfacing the frontage road and the other side road that we were going to do, they don't have to dig through those at all, do they?
Correct.
Okay, on our bid procedures, I believe the bids are opened and evaluated by a member of the finance department and the general manager. What is your standardized procedure?
Once bids are received, they will be evaluated by the district engineer, myself, and the finance department. That'll be the first initial evaluations. Any recommendations, of course, we get David's approval before we move forward with any recommendations.
Well, I'm suggesting that we might want to add a supervisor to that review committee on a rotating basis. Board have any thoughts on that?
That
let's give us.
Are those bids stamped when they come in? Date stamped?
They are date stamped. That is a new procedure that we implemented, yes.
Okay.
And a time.
Me either.
Well, let's see how that works out. I would suggest that maybe we start with recommending Larry White to be our liaison on that, let's say for 6 months. Larry?
We're going to do that in a thing. The only problem I've got is I'm going to be gone for 10 days starting Sunday.
I don't think that'll be a problem. Speaking of the maintenance project, which we've costed out, I believe Gator's estimate was $1.4 million. Is that right? That doesn't include any of the costs involved with relocating our services temporarily and coming back, does it?
The initial budget does not include those type of items.
I would imagine that's going to be a fairly large cost item, isn't it?
I don't have those numbers yet, but I will be, informing the board once we know what our relocation costs are going to be.
Well, I'm just curious if that's going to come out of a line item or how we're going to handle that, because this is the type of project that we better darn well be sure we are on top of regarding the request for proposals, bid documents, bid review, and on-site supervision, and all the auxiliary costs involved with that. And we've had a couple of bad experiences here recently. I don't want to duplicate that. So I would hope we would be extra vigilant.
We will. Once we have the bid finalized and we know what our relocation costs are, if there's any budget amendments that need to occur at that time, we'll definitely inform the board.
Yeah, that's
yes,
the same.
Absolutely.
That's the same concept that I think Supervisor Halbeck was making months ago when he said all of our engineering costs and design costs should be a part of the overall budget for any project, because particularly with this, I don't know how much our district engineer has spent on all the designs and reviews and so forth, but I would think that's very substantial, and that is not included in the 1.4, is it?
It's not included in the 1.4.
Yeah.
But we're charging his engineering fees and his time to that budget line item currently.
Okay, well, I'm just saying we want to be as transparent as we possibly can be in terms of all these projects. Now we got the bathroom underway, we got the north end underway. We have approved the sidewalk project, and do we have any kind of estimate when we actually are preparing these bid documents? And I assume, Gator, as a given, we'll be talking about performance bids and what else? We have actually proposal bid. All that's going to be in there. And we'll have a chance for full review prior to any publication. Is that correct? Okay. As you can tell, I'm a little nervous about making sure that we do it right this time. So,
understood. Highlands County now owns the property on Center Lake Boulevard in front of the hospital. I know that it's going to be an EMS fire sheriff office substation, and the design of the actual building is done by Polston Engineering. So that transaction finally occurred a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, Commissioner Hanley's not with us today, but you remember the recent article in Highlands today about the fire station review, that all the volunteer fire outfits are making recommendations. And in that, Commissioner Elwell, this was reported, suggested North Sebring should be at the yet-to-be-built station at Sun Lake of Sebring. And I'm not aware of any provision of any size for our EMS station. My understanding is we have one bay for equipment, but we're not building any kind of full-fledged fire operation at that site, are we?
Not that I'm aware of.
So this might be a misstatement.
Gator, can you speak to that statement?
It certainly caught my eye.
Long walk this morning. Gator Howerton, Polson Engineering. Right. Well, the county has actually expanded the building 3 or 4 times since the whole project started. Right now, I'm pretty sure it has 4 bays in it. It'll have 1 or possibly 2 for EMS and at least 2 for the fire. Then it'll also have a sheriff's office in there as well. Yes, this thing keeps expanding, and the building is almost outgrown the site for what they have right now. So we're working on some difficulties with elevations and things like that, but we're working through some of that. But they are maximizing the site. They're going to get as big a building as they can shoehorn in there, it looks like.
Do we have any kind of a time frame for that project actually going forward?
Well, we currently have Marvin Wolf, our engineer, one of the other engineers for our firm. He's working on the design on it right now. As soon as we can tie up some of the loose ends on the permitting wise, we'll have the Swift Mud permit, which that'll be happening hopefully within the next month or so. It's just waiting on a couple title policies from the county and from the district. But as soon as we have that done, we'll get the Swift Mud permit and get them signed off, get DEP to sign off, and everything will be taken care of there. But the actual building itself is in the design stage right now. It's on the finalizing, putting all the details and all the nuts and bolts together on the bid specifications. And so the county's taking care of some of that themselves in-house, and then we're providing some of the building details and the site plans for it. But
who will be charged with manning the fire protection component of that facility?
That's up to the county, but right now it's going to be, I believe, West Sebring Fire Department should be the one.
The group that we've
right, it's the same one, right, that we're dealing with now. So, they'll may even be the same equipment that are currently stored in our bays right now at the office. Or I'm not sure what they're going to put there, but they did expand the building. They made it wider so they could get a larger truck in, and they've made it longer, like I say, obviously longer, to have 4 bays on it now, all 4 drive-throughs.
And I take it we can expect added fire protection.
Yes, they will have fire sprinklers and all that, so we have to run a water line underneath the Sun Lake Boulevard, which is a county right-of-way, so we'll be getting a county permit for doing that, and it's part of their plan for the county. But yeah, it's going to be have to run a water line across there and tie the water line. It'll have to have a fire hydrant and fire sprinklers there as well. Because there are some water lines over there and some fire hydrants, but those fire hydrants and water lines are on the hospital's line. They have a master meter, and it's behind that master meter. Those are not part of our system, part of our public water system. So we'll run a water line underneath the road to serve that building.
It's an interesting development.
There's a lot of pieces to that puzzle going together. A lot of loose ends to tie up on that one.
Well, we're past any of the land situations.
Pretty much, yeah. We're down to just pretty simple stuff. The biggest thing I'm waiting on right now is DEP to review some documents that we sent over for the county's portion of the swap. And so once if they'll get me a letter back, I'm waiting on a document any day now from Mr. Schumacher. Once I get that, then I'll send that in, and which I've got to send that in next week, response back in, so I'll be getting that pretty quickly. And then we should hopefully have Swift Mud permit issued for that whole area. It'll involve the conservation easement swap, and then once they have that, then DEP will hopefully sign off on their part of it as well.
Swift Mud, that's our favorite agency, right?
Oh yes, it's one of those. I'll be bald by the time I get done with it. Sometimes I wonder, but
okay, thanks, Gator. Tanya, anything else?
One more item on my list. We're going to be replacing the south speed hump on Ponce de Leon Boulevard. We are going to be replacing it to be a speed table. Currently, that it is a hump. We've had a lot of complaints. It is very dangerous, and we've had it there several years. So we're going to be replacing that to a speed table.
Dangerous in what respect? Too high?
It is high, yes.
And they're going too fast.
And they're going too
And
fast.
that is a possibility
exactly right.
too. But we want to have it consistent with the other speed tables in the district. So we're going to be replacing that on Tuesday.
Okay, thank you. I guess we're back to our code enforcement discussion. And Tanya, I'll let you once again lead off on that.
Bob, are you going to be okay at the podium, or would you like to sit down?
This will be okay until I faint or something.
Okay. Supervisors, I'd like to introduce Bob. I say Bob Pritt. Do you go by Bob?
Yes.
It's Robert Pritt.
Just another Bob.
He is the attorney with City of Naples. And can you tell the board a little bit about yourself and the firm that you work for in Naples?
Well, I was born too long ago. My name is Robert Pritt. Can you hear me on the mic? Is that better? Yeah. As was mentioned, among other things, I serve as city attorney for the City of Naples. I'm with the law firm of Retzel and Andrus. That's Roetzel, but it rhymes with pretzel. Retzel and Andrus law firm, and we're a fairly large law firm throughout Florida and also in Ohio and in Chicago. I've been practicing law quite a while, 30 years in Florida, and in all of that time in Florida, I've done almost exclusively local government law. I was the city attorney for Sanibel for 13 years in-house, and one of my assignments, as was mentioned, is with City of Naples. I also represent other districts, CDD districts, fire districts, districts that are similar to yours, with regard to general representation and specifically with code enforcement issues. I teach code enforcement for USF, the John Scott Daly, it's called Florida Institute of Government, with USF and also with Florida Gulf Coast University. And I've taught most of the code enforcement officers in this county and around this area. They usually go over to, not always, but usually go over to Tampa for the code section. So that's a little bit about my background. I'm board certified in city, county, and local government law, and I'm on the certification committee. So we write the tests, for better or for worse, for certification. Enough said?
Enough said.
Did you want me to go ahead with the assignment, or did you want to introduce the assignment?
Just a brief background. Our first meeting with Bob was October 31st to discuss.
On my way back from.
On your way back from a training session that day, it was he made the comment it was quite longer than he anticipated to get here, but. After our first initial meeting, we've had. I proposed a list of questions. You reviewed those questions, gave us answers, gave us suggestions, and now we have a draft to you with proposed changes to our code enforcement ordinance.
That's right. And with your permission, if there's any particular way that you would like to go through this, I'll be glad to do it. I thought that since I think you have the memo from your general manager and a copy of the questions, some of the questions that she had posed to me, and a draft. I'll be glad to go through that. I will tell you that we're now to draft 8 drafts later, and I think this one says 5, but the changes between 5 and 8 mostly were fairly minor changes, with the exception of one issue I think that we probably would want to talk about. And so other than that, I'll be glad to either answer any questions if anybody has that, or if you'd like to have me go ahead and start, I'll do it on my own.
Well, I think as a first step, we'd want to hear what you have proposed in areas that you feel are particularly important with respect to change and improvement regarding enforcement and so forth. And
okay.
if it's reasonably brief, then after that, board members can ask any questions that they want to on that.
Okay, that'd be fine. A lawyer promising to be brief is the first fib that they give each time they do a presentation about
if you see us twitching up here, you know that you're at your limit.
The glaze-over effect, right. But part of the assignment was first to analyze your codes as to how they're working, practically speaking, and also to analyze your code in conjunction with your organic law, that is the county ordinances. And in doing that, I found that you're pretty far along. So you've done very well. Most districts do not. I have one district right now that's in 2 counties, and they're struggling with the idea about having code enforcement at all. And through the county ordinances, you can have code enforcement, and you have done that already. So it's a matter mainly of tweaking the county ordinance, updating the county ordinance, if you will. And there haven't been a whole lot of changes in code enforcement in the last decade. As far as the statute is concerned, the state statutes, Chapter 162 of the Florida statutes, there haven't been that many changes. There have been, noticeably, there were 3 changes to one section, which is, I'll get into in a minute here, the notice section, 162.12. But there have been some court cases that have affected how code enforcement would work, not just for you, but for everybody in the state and perhaps everybody in the country. I'll give you an example. The U.S. Supreme Court a couple of years ago had a major, well, every year they have major Fourth Amendment cases, but there was a major Fourth Amendment case having to do with a drug-sniffing dog for a police officer, happened to be in Florida, and the code enforcement officer, or actually he was a police officer, took the dog up to the porch. The dog smelled marijuana, and the dog was trained to do that, so they found that was a violation. Well, the Supreme Court in that case went all the way through the history of the Fourth Amendment, pre-Fourth Amendment, all the way back to England, and came to the conclusion that the code enforcement officer or police officer, whoever it may be, cannot be doing the inspection while they're going up to the front door to ask for permission to do the inspection. And the Supreme Court in that case created what we call the Girl Scout rule. If the Girl Scout can come up to the door to sell cookies, there's a license to do that. Well, so can the code enforcement officer or the police officer go up to the porch and ask for permission to do an inspection. But don't be doing the inspection while you're doing that. Now, and that's a matter of training. So when we give code enforcement training, we talk about that case. An example of a very recent case that you may not have even heard about, the Second District Court of Appeal here in Florida just last month adopted a rule, found that we call it, in code enforcement, we call it the failure to catch defense. And that is, somebody will come into the code enforcement proceeding and say, well, I've had it this way for 2 years. Nobody ever stopped me before, so I think it's legal. So the theory that a lot of people have is if it was not enforced, then therefore it could never be enforced. In code enforcement, we always said failure to catch, failure to find somebody, to locate somebody that's doing has a code violation, does not then make it legal. Something illegal does not become legal simply because you did not catch it. Well, the Second District Court of Appeal in Lakeland said that no, they can bring in the fact that nobody has been prosecuted or that they were not prosecuted for it for a long time. That really changes code enforcement quite a bit. So anyhow, it's the name of the case for anybody, your attorney is probably aware of it. It's Spiegel versus Lee County. So those are those are examples, not that the ordinances that you have are not perfectly good ordinances or were not perfectly good ordinances at the time they were adopted, and not that there have been a lot of changes in code enforcement by the legislature over the last 10 years, but the courts take a look at these cases and they say, well, this is not enforceable this particular way. And probably I'll give you the last case that I can think of right now off the top of my head. It's a case called Wells Fargo versus Palm Bay. You have in your ordinances, and I'll bet the county has in all of their code ordinances, a provision that says that any lien that you might have is a first lien and it's superior over all other liens other than ad valorem taxes and special assessments. Lien priority right up at the top. Well, we kind of always used to put all that. We used to put that into our ordinances because that was our way of saying that those are the most important liens. The Supreme Court about 3 years ago in the Palm Bay case said, no, your lien is not a superior lien, and therefore it may not be. It must be treated like other liens of its. Of the same level. The big deal about that is it goes behind a mortgage. It's underneath a mortgage now as opposed to being superior to a mortgage. That could make all the difference in the world with regard to a heavily indebted property. So those are examples as to why the ordinances have to be changed on occasion. Now, getting back to this ordinance, as I said, the ordinance is pretty good. It covers most of the things. Part of what I did was, along with your staff, they were very helpful, by the way, very knowledgeable. But one of the things we did is we looked to see whether or not there were any areas that needed to be updated simply because of case law, etc., and then looked at anything else where there might be needs of the district that hadn't been thought of or maybe have changed over the years, and went through that. And then I started drafting, and as I said, 8 drafts later, we have something that I think is ready to go to the county attorney's office for review if the board approves it and is ready to go. There are on the front page, the first 2 or 3, 4 pages are the questions and the questions to me and the responses that I made. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at them yet or not, but we were looking specifically at whether or not we could do certain things. I don't know. In most cases, what I did is I just did a response, a parking violation, under the definition of proposed surface section, delete the word mulch, and I didn't think there was a problem, and we did some reformulating there. 2-day parking, that's
Supervisors, do y'all have your list of questions? It was in the board packet.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Did you find your list there? Okay.
And the 2-day parking issue was identified as being an issue, so we did some redrafting on that, including removal of the provision, some of the provisions. Thirdly, in enforceable leash law, there was a question. Everybody has a problem with animals running at large, and the question was, should we have a specific leash law here for the district? And my response was, it's already a county ordinance, and therefore you don't need it. Doesn't mean you couldn't have or put something in and have that in your own ordinance, but there's already one in existence. Number 4, can the district limit the number of adult dogs at one residence? That's a tough one. But I came to the conclusion that is more of a policy question for the district than a legal question. I think you can have some limitations. In other places, there are limitations on size of animals, types of animals that can be kept. One of the biggest problems, if you want to call it a problem nowadays, is service animals and the different things that types of animals that people think are service animals and claim that they're really important for them. I need to have this boa constrictor because it makes me feel good, and I have this problem. This kind of stuff is actually floating around in federal law and in state law. And federal and state law, by the way, are not 100% in sync with each other. Pigs, of course, the idea of certain types of pigs and pigs of any size, etc. So I did put something in there that said there was an exception for bona fide service animals under state or federal law, and I said state or federal law because, again, they're not quite 100% the same. But I don't know if you've ever had anybody that has told you that, well, this is a service animal because of my condition, I have to have a service animal. And then the next question is, well, has that animal been registered either under state law or federal law? And the answer 9 times out of 10 is no. But there are some people who are pretty savvy about it, and the answer might be yes, there is. So the idea is to prove it. Limiting the number is the one that's really politically difficult.
Management is actually not going to recommend to limit the number. This was proposed to you initially, and after further discussions, we're not going to recommend to limit the number of dogs.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was, we wanted to bring it to your attention that this was a question, but we're not going to recommend that.
And that's fine. As I said, it's a very difficult question, and we just, I don't know, I've been dealing with this issue since the 80s as a city attorney, and well, why not cats? If you do dogs, why not cats? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And
you made a great point. Why not cats? Yeah. In our initial meeting, and we just all kind of looked at each other. Well, we can't just limit dogs, so.
Right. I do know of a place in Sanibel where the owner of a park says that cats were allowed but no dogs, and somebody was going to challenge him on it, and they said, well, the minute the cat starts barking, it's out of here too. So, but that really gets into a lot of difficult questions, and if that becomes an issue itself, I would suggest that be something that be dealt with separately rather than a more or less global change to your ordinances. There were questions concerning noise ordinance number 6. Can we have our own noise ordinance? I don't know if the county would want you to do that. That's something that we have not talked about with the county attorney's office with the county, but the county does have a noise ordinance. The problem with noise ordinances is that they're very hard to enforce. The Supreme Court of Florida, in one case having to do with automobile noise statute, it was actually a noise statute, the anti-boombox statute, the Supreme Court of Florida said, well, it's not a vagueness problem, but you do allow other kinds of people with loudspeakers, such as politicians. I don't know if anybody does that anymore, but the statute allowed people with megaphones and so on. So what's the difference between that? Noise is noise. So they're very difficult to do. If you really wanted to do your own, if you haven't already, you'd have to have a pretty good noise device, noise detection device. It's almost like a breathalyzer. It has to be very, very well constructed. It has to be qualified. You have to have qualified operators, which could be done. You could train your code enforcement officers to do that, but they'd probably have to be certified, and it'd have to be calibrated all the time. And it has a high chance of being challenged on its constitutionality. So you still have a noise ordinance, county noise ordinance, that is enforceable within the district, but do you really want to take the chance of having something that might be determined to be unconstitutional or illegal, and then get involved in all of that. And my recommendation, and I think the staff's recommendation, is no. Most of the cities and counties are still dealing with upgrading their noise ordinances anyhow, so that would be, at most, what I would suggest to the county is what can they do to make sure that they're upgrading theirs. And then there was a question about house numbers. That's already a county ordinance also. And one other thing that we talked about is whether there ought to be a situation in which your code enforcement officers could enforce county ordinances. That is a possibility, but most counties do not, cities and counties want to be responsible for their own staff and not be responsible for somebody else's staff. Again, that's one of those things that technically could legally be done, but the juice is probably not worth the squeeze, as they say, because it'd be probably better and easier and easier on the county if they enforce their codes, which they can enforce anywhere in the county, and your people enforce your codes unless there were some financial arrangement and so on. And there's a liability arrangement, a liability concern, and so on. So we did not make it that way. The last draft, the final draft, does not implement that. But just keep in mind, the back of your minds, that maybe someday you could do that if you had to. A lot of these things had to do with can you or can you not.
Excuse me, may I interrupt you on one?
Oh, yes. Yeah. That was about the last one. But go ahead.
Well, I wanted to expand on your comments about the county versus the district.
Yeah.
My understanding is that if we have a restriction that's in the county ordinance, the district cannot enforce that, and the person that makes a complaint will have to go to the county and depend upon the county to enforce or address that particular issue. Is that correct?
Yes.
So
they have county-wide jurisdiction, but your code enforcement officers only have district-wide jurisdiction.
Well, I would suggest that if we believe strongly in certain aspects of this, and which I'll get to, when we get into the question, it would be better for us to include that in our ordinance so that our own people can enforce that without having to go through a county process.
That's a possibility, yes.
Well, it seems like it would be advantageous for us to be able to immediately address an issue that comes up on the part of complaints by residents. And I have one case later on, but I point that out.
Yes, sir, that's a possibility. The other thing is it takes a lot of cooperation between jurisdictions, whether it's a county versus a city or a county versus a district, especially, though, if it's a district, because a district is technically, and I believe this is technically under the statute, dependent upon the county. So it takes a lot of back and forth between your people and their people as to how to cooperate and how to do a prosecution. Anyhow, without having anything specifically written in.
Well, as we get into questions from the board, I'll have some more comments.
Okay, sure. If you have any questions on the particular draft, a lot of what I did was just updated technical things. I made there were some places where, probably because one ordinance was done, county ordinance was done, one section was done at one time and another was done another time, where they just referred to a section as opposed to the entire article. And for inclusiveness, I made everything apply to the entire article. If you were rewriting, or if you were writing that from the beginning, I think that all at one time, I think that's what any drafter would do. And so I went ahead and made those changes. So you'll see a lot of underlines and strikeouts where it said section, and we put in article. The article is like, a section's like a sentence, and an article's like a whole paragraph, or the whole chapter, I guess. So we have in Florida law, we have chapter, and then we have articles, and then we have sections. So a lot of that was updating that. We did have an issue concerning the definition of vehicle. Your definition of vehicle was a little bit different from the state's, but we made sure that in making the changes that it still applies. It will still apply the way you applied it through your definitions in the past. So there will not be any material change in that. There are some new types of vehicles that are out there. Some of you have seen them. The question is whether or not they are vehicles at all. Things like your Segways, the hoverboards now, those are actually covered in state law. So in a couple places, we made sure that we had some type of treatment of these personal vehicles such as that, and got that covered. So that was more like updating, because we just needed to update. I don't think we have anything here on drones, but we're all waiting to see what comes out of the federal drone law. The feds say that they're in charge of that, not the state or local governments. Meanwhile, some cities and counties are going ahead with their own ordinances, which in my opinion are doomed to be found to be invalid as against the federal preemptions. On notice, I did make some changes, and I really want to highlight two things. I made changes on notice a little bit. That was one area that, as I indicated, I had the page, and then I lost it here. It starts on about page 11. It starts 11. It's L. I'm not sure that that's right, because I think one of the things we did in 8, I think we corrected these to make sure that's probably K now. But anyhow, this is right straight out of Chapter 162 of the Florida statutes, 162.12. The notice provisions that had been written originally, those were not any longer consistent with the state law, so we made them consistent with the state law. And I told the staff, let's don't change a word on that, because state law made it a lot easier for you to get your notices out than it used to be when this original when the county ordinance was originally written. And my advice is to just stick with what the state has. That way, if it's illegal, unconstitutional, or invalid, it's the state's fault, not yours. And it could be the state's cost, not yours. So that would be the methodology, and that goes on for 2 or 3 pages. And but I just assure you that that's right straight out of the Florida statutes as they currently exist. By the way, I started drafting this right after the legislative session was in January through March, middle of March this year. And as soon as we saw that we're not going to be any changes from the state that would be relevant here, then we started drafting. The worst thing in the world is to have a big drafting project and then get all done and find out that the state law just went and changed on you. So we started doing most of the drafting at that time. There was just one other section. Oh, the treatment of citations. The treatment of citations under your current code, the current code that applies to you, is a little bit different from state law. In that same Chapter 162 that I've been talking about, the county's been pretty good about going along with the state law, and Chapter 162 and all of Part 1 was about the same. However, on citations, your ordinance, the county ordinance for you deviates from that, a citation in Chapter 162 of Florida law normally goes to a judge, a county judge. So what they did instead is they had this go to your special magistrate. So you're the same person, the same special magistrate that handles regular violations. If it comes in by the way of a citation process, that citation is that also goes to the special magistrate. Fortunately, there is a provision in Chapter 162 that says a county or a city or a local government can enforce its codes in several ways. So I think it's legal to have the citation process where it goes to the special magistrate. I don't see a problem with that, but I just wanted to point that out. And therefore yours is a little bit different. What I did, though, is I took the citation process that's in Part 2 of Chapter 162 of the Florida statutes, and I made your citation process almost the same, to the extent we possibly could, as it would be if that were going to a judge here in the county. And there were some changes. And in that particular section, we had some changes to what I think were possibly unintentional, but to the penalties. The state penalty for a regular code violation that goes to the special magistrate or to a code enforcement board, in this case you have a special magistrate, the regular penalty can be a daily fine up to $250 per day, although you're in a larger fine county, so it can be up to $1,000. But there's a cap on that, but it's a daily fine. So every day, whatever the fine turns out to be after the hearing, let's say the special magistrate says $200 per day until corrected, that fine keeps on rolling and rolling and rolling. The result of that is that cities and counties all over the state have fines that are in the millions of dollars, $2 million. Our largest one, I think, in Naples was one of them still rolling, so it could be about $3 million by now. Well, that's useless money because the property's worth $100,000. But that's how that works. For better or for worse, that's how it works. It's a daily fine that keeps running. The citation process provides for a fine per citation or per violation. And the maximum is usually $500 per day. I'm sorry, not per day, per 500. The maximum is a maximum per violation. So if you have, it works very well in some cases for a lot of repeated types of small violations, but it doesn't work that well if you want to have a larger fine, just one hearing, and have that fine keep on rolling and rolling and rolling, because it's a fine for that day of violation, and if you want to have another one, you have to write another citation. So that's how it works, and I've made the corrections there to make it clear that it works the same way that the state law works. I think and I recommended a couple of things, an increase in the amount of money it takes to buy out. You can, if you have a citation and you decide not to contest it, then you can buy out of it by sending the money in, and hopefully that would be a lesson enough. If the amount of money is too low to buy out of it, then nobody's going to pay attention. If it's too high, they're going to take you to a hearing every single time. So somewhere in the middle, there ought to be a good number, and that's up to you to look at to see what you think that right number ought to be for your community. I made some suggestions there, but by no means are those the numbers that you should be looking at. It's got to be high enough to make it's kind of like a traffic violation, a traffic citation. You get caught speeding or running a red light, there's going to be an amount, but you can pay that amount and not have to go to court, or you can go to court and it could be higher. It might be lower, you might win. So it works the same way as a traffic citation. That process we're pretty used to. Okay, I'm seeing the glaze factor now. Any other questions you'd like to ask?
Gentlemen?
Or comments?
David, are you comfortable with with this whole thing?
I haven't reviewed it extensively, but yeah, all the changes that I've seen, I don't have any problem with, especially the stuff that's mirroring the state law. That's a fantastic idea.
And our people will be able to do a better job now with these.
I think so.
Okay.
Now I got to tell you,
I just know it's
from the
frustrating.
outsider's perspective, I'm very impressed. Anyhow, and in most cities and counties, most areas become incorporated for two reasons. In Lee County, for example, where I live, the last 4 out of 5. Fort Myers is so old you don't know for sure, but the last 4 out of 5 cities that were created for two reasons, primarily for two reasons. One, dissatisfaction with county zoning, and 2, dissatisfaction with the low level of code enforcement. Code enforcement is very popular, as you know, unless you're the one who gets the citation or the notice, but it is very popular and it is very necessary. And in talking with your people, I know that they know what they're doing. I can assure you that. And I think this will enhance their tools a little bit and update. I mean, if you're going to get challenged on something, you don't want to get challenged. I don't mind challenges, but you don't want to lose because your ordinance is not up to date. So my recommendation from here is when you feel comfortable with it, when your attorney is comfortable with it, then we approach the county attorney's office. We've already talked to an assistant county attorney, approach them with the kind of the finished product as we'd like to see it, and then let them start running with it.
Thank you.
Well, do you have a comment?
Yeah, and in the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, you receive pockets on updates and so forth when new things are codified. Do we receive updates when new code changes have come about?
I think you might through your office, Florida Association of Special Districts, you may get something from them. The Florida statutes, you get an update if you pay for it. And we used to pay for all those books, those big, heavy books and everything like that. But you can get it on a disc for about $75, I think, or something like that. Problem is you don't get it for about 6 months, and then it's about time for the legislature to go do it again. But, yeah, you will get updates on you don't necessarily get updates on case law. You have to be looking for that. And what I do as a full-time governmental attorney for one client or another, I'm always making sure that I read the Supreme Court decisions, the Court of Appeal decisions, anything that's reported, and especially on code enforcement, but on anything having to do with local government. Florida Supreme Court had a very big case on public records last month, and so we all have to know something about that. So I'm not sure what you get in the office.
The Florida Association of Special Districts, after the legislative session, will send an email out to all their members, a summary of everything that just transpired through the session. So that's how we receive our updates.
Right, but that may not tell you about. That would not tell you about the case law, and the case law
Correct.
is the thing that's a little bit hard to find. But your attorney, I presume. Most of us keep up on case laws, especially in our area, so I presume he does too.
Anybody else? Okay, I have quite a few questions. So,
okay.
First of all, to the persons that's trying, I'm talking about, I guess you call them a layman, myself, that's trying to go through and reference your comments to this. This format is very poorly structured. Is this a requirement that we have to go through this particular format?
Which format are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about the whole thing.
The question-answer format or the underlying?
No, the code enforcement ordinance per se. Let me give you an example. We discussed in your comments about the leash law for dogs and animals, and it took me 3 or 4 times to get to that point in this ordinance where we referred to animals. And Section 9102 We have minimum maintenance standards, parking and keeping and maintaining animals. It seems to me that's a hodgepodge section. If we're talking about animals, then we should have a section heading devoted to animals and the leash law. The fact that we refer to a county section doesn't help us in understanding what the enforcement provisions are. And I go back to the point I made before, is we need to have everything in our ordinance that enables our code enforcement officers to address that issue directly. Because I think you had said earlier that if we have a section there of the county ordinance that's not in our ordinance, the complainant has to go to the county for enforcement. I don't think that's a proper measure of what we need to do in this district. Is there any reason that we can't add sections so that we can, the common sections, for example, home business? The county ordinance spells out home business do's and don'ts very specifically. We don't reference that at all, and yet we've had a series of complaints over the last several months relating to this very topic. And our guys can't address it. They have to go to the county. So why shouldn't we include that provision in our ordinance so that our people can address that directly?
Well, I think you can. The question is, we don't know what the county would say about that, but I think you can address those things. Same thing with noise ordinance. You could have your own noise ordinance, but part of the question was, is it already out there? And yes, it is. I mean, it is. Certain things are illegal under the county ordinance already. If you want to enhance that by making other things illegal specifically under your own ordinance, I think that in most cases you can, unless you're preempted, and that is where the county says only has, or the state law says only the county.
Well, we won't know until we try, right?
Well, I mean, we know generally what would be preempted and not preempted. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of preemptions, but generally I know what the relevant preemptions are.
I'd like our people to take another look at the format of this that makes it a lot easier to traverse as we go back and forth trying to find things. I think, for example, animal considerations are an important part of it. I think that should be in our ordinance. The lease law should be specified in our ordinance, and we should have a section relating to that. I think we should have a section relating to home business, which crops up here quite frequently. And all I'm saying is, for our ease of enforcement, we eliminate one step, and the person that's complaining doesn't want to go into our district office and talk to our enforcement people, and they say, oh, well, gee, that's a county thing, and we have to go to that. So let's try to get that as specific as possible.
If that's the sense of the board, we can do that.
I have a question regarding that. Aren't there, the county code ordinance itself is much larger than the districts, right? I mean, yes. And there are many, territorially, yes. There are many code enforcement issues that are enforced by the county that are not enforced by the district. What you're saying is we're recommending to put certain aspects into our enforcement from the county code? I mean, wouldn't you... Are there districts out there?
That's exactly what I'm suggesting, so that it makes it easier for our people to enforce things as they arise.
Okay.
I'm not saying that we have to deviate from county, but if we include it, then we eliminate one enforcement step.
So we can actually determine which ones out of the county code we want to enforce, and then any ones that are excluded, we just exclude and allow the county to enforce?
Well, one thing you can do is globally say that they have the enforcement. Make it clear that they have the enforcement can't have the enforcement duties, responsibilities, authority to enforce any county code that occurs, a violation that occurs within the district. Or you can, the other way of doing it, and maybe this is the way you're suggesting, but the other way of doing it is to do what we call incorporating certain ones or all of them into your own code.
That's exactly what I'm suggesting.
It's a policy decision, and can it be done? The answer is legally, yes, it can.
Okay, can I go on?
Sure. Yes, you're the chair. You can always go on.
One of the things that struck me is we spent an awful lot of time, and rightly so, in the term, in the sense of processing citations and violations. We have pages of what the magistrate does, the timing, and so forth. But yet, when you go to the front of the ordinance, you're very vague about some of these violations. Let me give you some examples. We have structures and sanitation. There's no definition for unsanitary conditions. There's no definition for health and safety hazards. You have a definition section in the first couple of pages, but it's devoid of any reference to that. So how do our people enforce these provisions, structures and sanitation, if they don't have specific benchmarks in which to judge whether or not a property is in violation?
Let me take health, safety, and welfare, for example. That's probably the broadest term in all of code enforcement. That's called a police power that the local government has, and it is designed to be as broad a definition as possible, and that definition has been upheld by court after court after court. So any attempt to make it more and more specific will do nothing but narrow it more and more. That's with health, safety, and welfare. It's possible maybe to do that with some of the other definitions. The problem is that the current code, I was trying not to do too much of a change to the current code where it seems to be working okay, we could add definition after definition after definition, and I don't know what that's going to gain us. I'm not saying no, but...
Well, I'm just saying that we cite these things without defining what the level of acceptance is. I think we need to make an attempt to define in more detail, wherever we draw it from, that's acceptable legally, so that our people have firmer benchmarks for that. Well, I just leave it at that.
All right.
I think we should have an animal section in here. I think the leash law, and other aspects should be spelled out, and that's deserving of our own section in that. We certainly spend an awful lot of time with found dogs and dogs running loose and this and that and everything, and we even to the point where we put pictures up of lost dogs, found dogs, and so forth, and yet it's buried in one sentence in a section that's devoted to parking and maintenance. Pardon me, I'm going through my notes here. Yeah, nuisance is a rather vague term as well, isn't it?
Yes. Nuisance has been around since 1500, I think, or thereabouts. And the definition of nuisance right out of the state statute is anything any situation that attempts to annoy others. It's like breach of peace. And again, these things have been defined by so many courts over so many hundreds of years that if this were a brand new cause of action, it would be vague all over the place. However, the courts are going to know and are going to uphold something based upon nuisance if there really is a problem, and that's why we use nuisance.
Well, that's very vague. And then you have civil and...
I'll be glad to, I think this follows state law, but if we need to make sure that the definition of nuisance from state law is put in here, I have no problem with that.
I think that would be very helpful, because somebody reads and they see nuisance and it's defined in the front along with the other definitions, that would be helpful.
Sure. To be more precise, state statutory law, because nuisance is a common law term long before the state was ever a state. So, but I'll make sure that we're using the state definition.
Yeah, I would certainly greatly expand our definition section so that when people read nuisance, sanitation, health, safety, and so forth, there's some kind of benchmarks involved in that. The same goes for civil infraction. We talk about a civil infraction, but we don't define it. It may be an obvious definition, but I still think it should be defined.
Yeah, by the way, a civil infraction is anything that's not it's a fine or anything, a violation that is not criminal.
That's lawyers speak.
We can add that as part of the definitions. We can add it.
Okay.
I remember the day I learned the difference.
Okay. Well, I would end with simply saying I would like to see a section devoted to animals. I'd like to see inclusion of the leash law. I would like to see a home business section be added, so that we have the authority, and I would like to see our definitions greatly expanded, so provide our people with more benchmarks as far as enforcement goes. And also we reference a number of statutes and ordinances in our ordinance, but you just have a title. It doesn't say what they are or what they represent. I mean, it's ABC stuff. So you have CH 162, I believe it is. I have no idea what that is if I read this ordinance. So there should be some kind of reference to that can guide us to, hey, look up State Statute 162.
I will use tag. I will change that and add the tag. Those are called catch lines or tag lines. Just like your county code, it'll have the number, then it'll say what it is, and you commented on one of them. That's out of the county code. The catch lines or the tag lines are not law. They're not to be interpreted as law, but they're just descriptive of what the law is. So, but I have no problem in doing that. I'll just use the state statute.
Two things in mind. Number one, to make it as easy as possible for, if I use that term, non-professionals or laymen, just to traverse this ordinance so that they understand what's in there, where to go, and they can find something. Maybe even a table of contents of major sections would be helpful. And secondly, I'd like to see as much as possible added to our ordinance, so that the issues that we come up against time and time again, we can eliminate that county step. Not to disagree with the county, but simply so that Mike Hurley and his people can say, yeah, we can address that, we can enforce that, we can cite that, and we can then, in my opinion, be more responsive to situations that our residents are concerned with. Okay. I'm going to open this to public discussion. Are there any comments?
Bill Norcross, resident of Pebble Beach Drive. Thank you very much, Bob, I guess your name is, from coming up here and trying to enlighten us a little bit about the code enforcement, which is a favorite subject of mine, which I'm just about ready to give up on, but here we are again. We have a situation here that I just briefly looked through this, and I didn't say anything about the situation that people they park their boats or do something and they say, we're grandfathered in. Well, where do we draw the line? Today, yesterday, 2 weeks ago, last year, or when we write up some new bills? The snipe signs, which are prevalent at certain times of the year. I don't mind a garage sale sign, but I don't like to have somebody run a darn business in here because they're not supposed to. And it seems though it's like a tacit approval that you just avoid any enforcement of these signs. A point that I had when I had my house built, my builder gave me specific code rules. Other builders or second-hand owners are not informed of these rules. And so therefore, as the second owner comes in, they just do whatever they want to do. They're uninformed. So, really, I'd like to see when we do have an update of the code enforcement, make sure that everybody is on the same page and can understand. Now, briefly over on 6, on one of the comments here is something about noise limits. Now, I have a boombox that goes off at 12 o'clock at midnight. I could schedule it right on time, wakes me up, thank you very much. You can limit noise by a certain amount of decibels at a certain time. So that's one option. In 7, you talk about code enforcement officers here. We pay county taxes, I know. All right, county taxes are almost 3 times as much as our district taxes. And it's very hard to get a county enforcement officer to come into the district because they do cover the district. They have their rules and we have our rules. And I just wish the county officers and the county enforcement or the district enforcement people get together and really do the job that they should be doing. So I appreciate the updating of this code enforcement thing, but I think this grandfathered and snipe sign should be dealt with. Thank you.
Well, grandfathering is spelled out precisely. So, I mean, you're either in or you're not in. But I do want to ask one question. Mike Hurley, Bill's point about signs. I don't see any real addressing of that. Am I wrong, Bob? Excuse me, sir. We don't address signs in this draft, do we? Okay. The issue, the ongoing issue, and Jim, I'll be with you in a minute. The ongoing issue that we've had for quite some time is we have a policy of, except for, I guess, political campaigns, but if a sign is on private property, that's their right to have a sign. But any signs like advertising garage sales or new housing or stuff like that in our right-of-way is to be picked up. And I just wonder if we shouldn't formalize that as part of the ordinance.
May I?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned signs. I went to a city-county local government conference seminar last weekend, and one of the national experts on signage litigation told all of us, every single city and county and district in the state, that our sign codes were unconstitutional under a case called Reed versus Gilbert. Gilbert, Arizona is the name of the town. Reed versus town of Gilbert. And that was actually a sign ordinance that regulated signs in the right-of-way. And there was a little church that had its meeting somewhere, not at a regular church building, but at another building. I forget if it was a school or whatever, but they had, on Sunday, they would put up signs in the right-of-way as to where it was, and they'd had several signs, apparently. And a lot of people would say, well, these are signs in the right-of-way, and doggone it, let's get rid of those signs. As all of us said that, and the Supreme Court, 9-0, found that the sign violation was unconstitutional. So we are all scrambling now to rewrite our sign codes. I will assure you, every city and county, unless they've been fast asleep since last June 28th, when that case came out, are working on upgrading their county sign code. From your standpoint, my recommendation would be that we talk with the county about what they're doing. The last thing I would want to have you do is your own sign code, only to have it found to be unconstitutional, because the cost of a challenge is not only your own attorney's fees, but also the other side's attorney's fees. We're talking about cases. The last case went to the U.S. Supreme Court. So my answer is, I think that you need to be able to do something about snipe signs. What you need to do about signs, my advice would be do it through the county. So the county's code would be the one challenged, not your code, and work with the county, either your attorney or possibly I could, but your attorney certainly work with the county to make sure that their sign code is upgraded. Again, that had to do with signs in the right-of-way. My advice remains that if it's a sign in the right-of-way, you can snatch it and pick it up and take it away, and you don't have to have any process. That's what we have done. However, you have to have your sign code upgraded and updated to make it clear what you're doing. And what normally happens is somebody says, well, we don't want these snipe signs because we don't like these snipe signs, but it's okay for the community center to have it, but it's okay for the church to have it, or we like a banner sign for Sun and Lake across the street, across one of our streets, because it's our celebration. That's what the Supreme Court and all of our courts of appeal, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal in Florida, have said consistently is if it's content-based, it's going to be very, very difficult to do anything about it. So it's a bigger issue, but it'll be something that with good drafting, we can still get our sign codes back together. Oh, the other problem is that the law is, at least in the 11th Circuit, which we're in, is that this is a federal circuit, so it's all of Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. If one portion of a sign code is found to be invalid, then the whole sign code is invalid. So remember, we're talking about First Amendment speech. It's not quite as easy as it might look, but I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying let's just be careful. And my recommendation is that not be something that you put yourself out there in front, because there are a lot of smart lawyers out there that know something about Reed versus Gilbert. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Jim?
Yeah. I'd like to go back
Jim,
to the Lynch
identify
law.
yourself, please.
I'd like to go back to the Lynch law.
Jim, excuse me. Identify yourself for the record, please.
Jim Steele, 3300 Monza Drive. I want to go back to the leash law. And I didn't get to hear what he said because I don't have my hearing aids in. And I tried it over there and I still couldn't hear him. So, are you saying that if you're on private property, you must have a leash on your dog?
Yes.
I don't know.
Bob?
Where's Mike?
Mike just went to the bathroom.
Oh.
Yes, you still have to have your leash on your dog on a leash.
I can't hear you.
You have to have your dog on a leash at all times.
Why? When I have an electric fence, he can't get out.
How does anybody know that?
It's underground, and I'll guarantee if I put that necklace around your neck, it'll knock you right on your butt.
I guess at the present time we don't have that reference here in the draft.
I asked Bob. I was going to ask him a while ago, and he didn't say that in there.
Yeah, I guess we follow the county on that, but we should adopt it. Mike, while you were gone, Jim Steele has asked the question: if my dog is on private property, does that dog have to on my property? Does that dog have to be on a leash?
No. Well, there's a couple. Well, like in Jim's case, he has a
electric fence,
right? And there are a lot of residents that have that. If it's in your own yard, but once it leaves the yard, it has to be on a leash.
Yeah.
And that right now is expressed in the county ordinance.
He didn't get that far. I mean, not Mike, but Bob.
Right.
That was my question.
Right. I mean, we've had calls that neighbors would say there's a loose dog. Well, we would go over there, and it has the electric fence. The dogs, they're loose, but they don't leave the yard.
They can't leave.
It's not on a leash, but it can't leave the yard because it gets zapped.
But how do we know?
I've got it all the way up to 10, and I'll guarantee you there isn't one soul in this room that can go through that yard and that electric fence.
Well, I think, Jim, I think the question's been answered.
My answer is, how do we know that you have an electric fence?
I don't want you to know. You know why I don't want you to know? Because at 12 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, my 10-year-old female dog has been taught to lay in the window and bark when somebody walks by. But she cannot get out of the
Invisible fence, it's called. It's called a visible fence.
I understand what you're saying, okay?
Well,
but your dog is out in the yard, but how do we know that you have an electric fence? Somebody can be walking by and...
Why in the hell should I tell you?
Good point. You don't understand.
Yes, I do.
You don't understand.
You're trying to make a mountain out of a molehill.
No, what I'm trying to say is we've had people that have walked by and the dog will go right up and
He'll do what? Bark. He'll bark. He'll bark. He'll bark.
Okay, I think we've exhausted this subject. Mike, let me ask you just one question.
Mark.
Excuse me.
Electric fence.
Excuse me, Rick. Excuse me.
I don't know.
Jimmy,
the county covers the leash situation, right?
Right.
And when you see a dog running loose, technically that's the county, that's a complaint to the county, right? But we go ahead and address it.
Right. Usually we pick them up. We like you said, we put it on the Sun and Lake, because people do lose dogs, and we'll keep them for a couple of days, and we've picked up over 250 dogs.
Well, that's beside the point, but you go ahead and address that situation.
Yeah, through the county, yeah.
Well,
animal control.
That goes back to my point. It would be easier if you had that in our ordinance so that you'd be on solid ground on that, okay? Yes. Thank you.
Tom Costy, resident. By the way, our ordinance is a county ordinance. And all of our code enforcement requirements are passed and put in a county ordinance by the county after being vetted by the district attorney, then the county attorney, and before it becomes a code item for Sun and Lake, it's actually been passed by the county commission. So here's a question that's going to answer a lot of this, I think. The county grass height requirement is 18 inches. The county has passed an ordinance for Sun and Lake at our request. Ours is 12 inches. Now, does the counties take precedent? That's my question to you, Bob. In other words, can we enforce a 12-inch grass height ordinance when the county says the maximum is 18 inches? So we can. So we can be more specific, more strict than the county, is what you're saying. Okay. That's really the only point I had is whether or not and by the way, if you want to read if you'll take the time to read our code enforcement section in the county ordinance, it'll probably take less than a half hour to read the whole thing. So a lot of these questions, for instance, the dog leash requirement is only in effect when the dog is off of your property. And it specifically says that in our code section of that county ordinance. Thank you.
Larry Bertetto, resident. My question is, what do you do with the continual violators?
Have you read the draft? You haven't read the draft.
I did not see that. What do we do with them? Of the fact that, and I know you don't want to hear it, but I'm going to say it anyway. For more than 10 years, I've argued about grass, about property, and nothing gets done. And yet for 10 years it goes on and on and on. So I found it very difficult to try to read the blue and black underlined things that were in the ordinance. I think we need something that we have a person who continually violates it, that something happens to them. I mean, why do you have to go for 10 years?
Well, let me stop you right there. I believe in the enforcement section of this, we deal with repeat violators to the point of daily fines. What else would you have us do?
Well, are you saying then that the violation that I've turned in for the past 10 years, that we go through it twice a year, that's the end of it, or does that person get fined? Where do we go?
Are you talking about the property across?
Yes, I am.
Well, I think we've addressed that time and time
I know
again.
it. And if it wasn't for you, Mr. President, it probably wouldn't have gotten done, because certainly our code enforcement people don't enforce it. The only time it's truly got enforced is when Jerry Geoch was here, that got out of his truck, went to the door and knocked on people's door and told them there was a violation. We send out notices. And it takes weeks for it to get done. I think our code enforcement, I think it's not good. And I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Bill?
Bill Jackson, resident. One of the things, maybe I haven't read it close enough yet, is I got a parade of vehicles, little motorcycles, little ones. The other day I saw one where a kid, must have been 6 years old, was riding a motorized vehicle up in front of my house. And are these motorized vehicles, are they in this code so we can stop that? Now, also, I know you can drive a golf cart. Okay. But you can't be a kid. You see kids running around, 2 or 3 young kids running around in golf carts. And I think that's dangerous.
Well, I think we follow state law on that. What is the age? 14, 16?
14.
Yeah, and I see that too, Bill. But, it's like a snapshot over here on this street, and our code enforcement guys are in another part. I mean, it's potluck.
Well, a lot of times you know where these people are. And you see them drive up to a house, a kid. And anyway, all these next ordinances you have here are wonderful. I appreciate you doing this. But it's valueless unless we get tough enforcement. And what I mean by tough enforcement is someone drives around a neighborhood. If there's violations, they get out and solve it. Now, the other is a fist in the face. I can write a complaint and get someone over there to look at it, but then I've got a hostile neighbor for the rest of my life. So if you have to wait for someone to sign a complaint or make a verbal complaint, you don't have code enforcement. I got two neighbors. One of them, recently I mentioned to code enforcement that the one neighbor down there has these pallets set down. He was selling things on them. And he left a mess by where the garbage cans go. It was all straightened out. Great. One neighbor down, he's got a boat in the driveway. He parks on the lawn almost all the time. Leaves his trailer out there. He's got boxes stacked in front of his house. Someone driving that thing would have to be blind if they drove by that place and didn't see that. I don't see any of it stopped. I don't see it being prevented. Now, I don't know about these other people here, but I don't want to create an enemy with one of my neighbors. And I don't think I have to do that. That's code enforcement's job. They should be driving all the streets and get around to the entire district every so often. They don't send them a memo. They stop their car, they get out and ring the doorbell. And then they tell them this is a code enforcement. If there's any hostility, I understand, back off and get the police. But if you don't get out every day and see these things, which I bet you 90% of it could be solved if you just went up and told them what they're doing. But if you don't get out of that car and knock on that door, introduce yourself and say, this is in violation of the code. Can we get that corrected? When do you think you'll have that corrected? It isn't any code enforcement. And it's valueless. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Have I got 3 minutes?
You got 3 minutes.
First thing I'd like to find out, and I'd like to ask the attorney. Oh, Joe Eck for the record.
Thank you, Patty. I forgot about that.
I did too, Jackson. I missed part of what you were saying there, and like other people, I'm a little hard hearing, but I got turned up as high as I'll go. But Patty,
of all people, of all people, where are the noise police when we need them? Okay. All right. All right, Joe, go ahead.
Joe, speak into the mic.
Hell, if I get any closer, I'll be kissing it.
That's all right.
Hey, that goes for you, too, when you're up there. But anyway, is there anything in this set of rules and regulations who is allowed to deliver violations? Because right now, we have a code enforcement. They're not code enforcement violations being delivered by security. And I think if you check with the state, they are not allowed to do it. There's some place in there, I know I read part of it in there, it said something that anybody from the district can be assigned to deliver it. But that means a hobo going down the road can take and be designated and can deliver it?
Oh, I'm not going to answer that question. You are.
That's the one I asked you about, Dick.
Yes, right out of, this is Bob Pritt once again, right out of the Chapter 162, Code Enforcement, Part 1 of the Florida statutes. And by the way, we put those in so that the lawyers can find it too. At least you know where to go
for an hourly fee, of course.
But right out of the statute, it says all notices and citations required or authorized by these sections shall be provided to the alleged violator by, and then it says certified mail is a methodology, but if it's hand delivery, it's by the sheriff or other law enforcement officer, code inspector, or other person designated by the district. So that's right straight out of state law, and it's up to you who to designate or not designate, but that's this is, of course, this is proposed language that I recommend be put in there, but this tracks the state law word for word. They don't use the word district. They used, I think they used the governing body. You know, so that'd be a city, a county, or district. So yes, they can. Whether or not they should, that's policy.
What you're suggesting is we include that in the language of our ordinance.
Oh yes, that's underlined in here in the draft.
Okay. Joe, that answer it?
That answers that, yeah. Now,
more?
the other question is, too, can the supervisor of code enforcement be a person that doesn't carry a license to be a code enforcement?
Yes. In Florida, we do not have a requirement for a code enforcement officer to be licensed or certified. All they have to be is old enough to serve something, so therefore 21 years of age, and they must be designated by the CEO, whether it's a county manager, city manager, general manager, as a code enforcement officer. Okay.
Joe, I think that everybody that Mike or the district has designated as code enforcement officer, wait a minute, let me finish, has received some training, is that correct? Is there any certification attached to that or what?
I think one or more of them were in my class at one time or the other. There's something called the Florida Association of Code Enforcement, FACE, and they do seminars regularly through the Florida Institute of Government. When I first got up, I said I teach some of the seminars or portions of. There's a level 1 seminar that's 5 days. 5 long days of training, plus they have to take a test and they have to pass it in order to get that certification by the Florida Institute or Florida Association of Code Enforcement. There's a level 2 on report writing, a level 3 that's all law. They spend a whole week with me or another attorney going through all these legal aspects, and I think they have a level 4 now also. So yes, those are, and I know from memory, I think I know that one or more of you have been in one or more of my classes, so I think they're certified. They can answer for themselves. By certified, there's a difference between licensed by the state, which is not required, and being certified through FACE, which is an indication that they've had sufficient training.
Good. Thank you.
Don't go away yet. Okay, the other one, Dick.
You have a question of, let Joe finish, please.
The other thing is, too, you're talking about these codes and everything here for this piggybacking I'm going to use coming off the county. We can piggyback off of any of them there as long as you get the approval of the Board of County Commissioners. Okay? Now,
everything we're proposing here will follow that process.
Yeah. Okay. Now, in case anybody's wondering, I spent 29 years in Naples, but I applied for code enforcement down there. I knew the code inside out. That's been years ago. Okay. I applied for the building inspectors down there. They turned me down on both of them because I knew too damn much, and I wasn't afraid to tell them about it. So, but anyway, we're going to have at the end of the meeting
public comment.
Yeah,
we'll have public comment.
All right, let me get on down with this here.
You're still on code enforcement?
Yeah. Let me approve and all that stuff. Now, I'd like to hit on this here. What's this? You're talking about the signs. We have a resolution right now on signs from the district that was put in effect back some 8-10 years ago. And that was had to have permission from the general manager in order to put signs out there. You have it for the district already. The county has it for the county on Sun Lake Boulevard. So no need of putting any more into that.
Well, I'm just trying to dot the I's and cross the T's. So anything else, Joe, we'll do under public comment, okay?
Yeah, when you get to the signs of putting up the new ones, on the one that's coming in on the first circle, I've told Bob Brumfield, I've told Mike Curley, down at the bottom, it says down there, no solicitation, and it ain't that big. Can you blow it up and get it bigger up there? I get tired of calling them, telling them to get these people out of there. But I got to go back on one more thing on Unit 2. I don't agree with what
Joe, you're getting into other areas now. Come on. Save it for public comment, because Rusty has a question on...
Well, this is on this code enforcement here. And that is the parking in Unit 2 down there.
Yeah.
Unit 2 was the first unit being built in here. The ABCs was the second one. Those two areas has property that's not near the size of everybody else's. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to park on that grass as many times as I have to. I don't park on it unless I have to. But if you put a violation on me, I will file a civil suit against you because of my car being on there. Because this deal, 2 days in a 30-day period, that's I guess you'd say infringing on my civil rights. And if I have to, I will get an attorney and do it.
Okay, Joe, we hear you on that.
All right. Now I'll wait for the rest.
Rusty, do you have a question on code enforcement?
No, the only thing.
Pardon me?
The only thing I was going to say was, I think...
Podium, please.
In listening to Rusty Carino, resident, in listening to this gentleman make his presentation, I think the whole key is that you designating this person to have the right to perform these duties. And I think that's the whole key. My other recommendation is I think that you ought to select Joe to be part of that code enforcement.
Well, I'd be scared of what's going to happen if Joe was up there.
Hey, I'm going on 83 now, but damn if I want to do any more.
All right. Come on. I think we've exhausted this subject. I want to thank you very much for coming and taking your time to walk us through this, and I think we have a lot that we still have to consider, so we'll go from there, but thank you very much. Okay. Yeah, no unfinished business, no new business, no committee reports. Public comments. Oh, we may set a record. Tom, are you coming up? I'm about ready to...
Public comment.
How many? I'll wait till the first. I had a question for Tanya.
It's a comment, public comment.
Okay, here's the question. Maybe somebody else here at the meeting can answer it. How many bids did we get? How many quotes did we get on removing that tree off of, what is that, hole number 14? How many quotes did we get on that?
It's coming up to answer it.
3.
And what was the total on it? How much did it cost?
$3,000.
What's going to happen to the second tree that got taken down during the process? Is that going to be replaced by the contractor?
We haven't finished talking about that yet.
Okay. Just curious. So you do know that there was a tall palm tree that was taken out by the contractor while he was in here. Was that the same contractor that took the palm tree off of number 7 on Turtle by mistake?
No, the palm tree on number 7 was struck by lightning, and we took that tree down.
I thought it was the wrong fairway. Somebody told me that tree was not the one that got hit by lightning. Okay, that was my question. Was regard to the whether or not we got quotes. I had heard it was $5,000, but that seemed like a pretty high number. Thank you.
For the record, Chrissy, that was Tom Costy. Just so she knows, yes. Well, just a minute, Larry. David, maybe Jim, did that come out of the Billy Casper budget or did that come out of the district budget?
It comes out of our operating budget.
All right. So that was part of your area. Okay, just checking. Okay, Larry.
Thank you, sir. Larry Bertetto. Number one, thank you for giving a plaque to Mr. Helbig for all the years that he spent here on the board and was instrumental in a lot of the things that have happened in Sun and Lake, and he wasn't afraid to speak his mind. I think he worked very, very hard for the district. And he'll be a tough person to replace. Number two, I want to thank you, Mr. Miller, because you have spoken out continually over the years that you've been here on the board. And it's something that I don't see out of the rest of the board members. I have been to many, many meetings over my many years here. It comes time for supervisors' discussion. There is no discussion. An example of that was the last meeting that Mr. Helbig attended, and he made a comment about paying Billy What's-His-Face $45,000 because we only lost $171,000. And no supervisor made a comment about it. And he requested or asked that perhaps down the road that we look at some of these things. We have board discussion, and board discussion is silence. I know Mr. Miller has. I know Mr. Helbig has worked very hard in trying to look at a lot of things that go on. Wally, I hope that you will do the same. I trust that you would dig into matters that we have and make them good and represent the entire community and not just a small section. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Larry. The reason there was so little discussion at one point, it was crystal clear that under the terms of the existing contract, we were obligated to pay that sum. And just so you know, the contract is currently under review by an independent entity to see weaknesses and strengths and positions and so forth. So I don't know when that'll be finished, but it will be in near term. It's in their hands at the present time. Joe, again?
Yeah.
Joick.
Excuse me, Joe.
I'd like to make a comment back to Larry Potato. I sit up here and I don't say a whole heck of a lot, but I do a lot of background checking, and I listen to what's going on, and I make a lot of decisions before I get up here on this board. So I'm a little put back about what you just got through saying, that we just sit here and do nothing. Thank you.
Joe. Okay, like I said, Joick, I got a question here on the building that's down in the maintenance area that's going to be put up down there.
You mean as part of the whole project?
Yeah, down there.
The new building.
Yeah, Gator's long gone, but what's the question?
My question is, are we having to pay for the permit and all that goody stuff? We went through that one time before. Whenever we start, what was it, the candlelight, I think it was up there called, when Grease Hyber was here and he was spending money buying permits and everything through the county, are we going to have permits?
Well, we're following all the rules, and Mike, maybe you can be more specific, but we are in a permitting process. I think we've applied for all the necessary permits, right?
Exactly, absolutely. He's going through every permit, everything that we have to do. Gator's gone through. He's actually almost there. He's doing a great job, because I've been actually sitting a lot with him. Tanya and I sit a lot with him and talk about the building. And he's going through all the permits the way it's supposed to be done, Joe.
Joe, I think the answer is there's all sorts of hoops that we had to follow, to get this thing underway.
I know how to jump through them hoops and loops. Tongue's twisted. I spent 50 years in construction, so I know about them. But what I'm getting at is, when we, built the candlelight back, okay? We paid for a permit when Grease Hyber was here, and I went to the county and found out why we were paying for that. We're a special taxing district on our own, and that was for the permits to build that candlelight. Now, are we paying to have that done again? We should be exempt from any building or cost on that.
You're talking about the new clubhouse, not the candlelight, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have an answer for that.
Well, that's something we need to check on, because
the first I've heard of that.
I don't know. I never heard it either.
Because governments are what do you call it?
Exempt?
Exempt from it. Yeah. That's why I went down and fought with them down there and told them we shouldn't be paying it. And I got back $104,000 in permits for the district.
I think I remember that.
Yeah.
You did. You did noble duty on that. I can't answer the question you have.
Well, that's something that somebody needs to find out
about. The district
engineer
engineer is handling that. Gator, he's handling all that.
Because
I guess your question is, are we paying out more for permitting than we should be? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying, are we exempt from having to pay for permitting? We get permits from the county, but we should be exempt. We're a government agency, just like they are.
Well, I know you went through that before, and you answered that. Tanya?
Yeah,
I don't have an answer for that.
We'll look into it. I don't know. I don't have anything else.
They'll check it, Joe.
There was $104,000, if I ain't mistaken, that they charged us for a permit for that candlelight there we got back.
We framed that check, by the way.
Nope, I forget it. I'm done with it. Thanks.
You did. Okay.
Mike Hurley, and I'm talking as a resident now.
Uh-oh.
I've been sitting here for 6 months listening to people in the audience beat up everybody in this place. These people up here do a good job. They're volunteers. They put a lot of hours in. Okay? Tanya does a great job. Tanya took over a tough job, and you guys And I sat in the meeting, and people questioned why we hired her. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, you're lucky to have what we have. Instead of sitting in the audience all the time and complain about everything goes on, then volunteer, then help us. But all right, but don't sit there and beat everybody up all the time.
Bill Jackson, it seems like we should change the name of the district to Sun and Lake Construction Company. We got more things going on and built here. But we don't have the one thing that would make this easier and we could get better control of. That's an engineer, a licensed engineer from the state of Florida. Now, I know we're doing, we said we couldn't get one. I don't know. But all I know is with all this going on around here, we should have someone who can come in and take that responsibility and make sure it's being done right. I think we tried to get one time and it didn't work out. That should be something that we do all the time, is try to get someone in here.
Well, let me answer that two ways. Number one, we have a district engineer in our consulting firm, Polston Associates. And I think you'll agree that Gator has done a very consistent and a very good, solid job fulfilling that responsibility. Okay, I'm just saying that. On the other hand, we have been looking for that in-house engineer that you're talking about. And what I'm finding out, believe it or not, it's not very easy unless you pay an outrageous fee. Now, my salary, I guess my idea of salaries is in time warp. I'm probably 30 years in the past on that. But no, just sit, Bill, just sit. Anyway, we are looking for that person. We're trying to find that person at a decent salary level. That is an unfulfilled position, and we're just going to have to see where we can go on that. So it's there.
You consider too high salary?
Well, I don't even want to embarrass myself. Go ahead, Rusty.
Rusty Carino, resident. First of all, I'd like to thank you guys for that sign that you put at the north end of the north entrance into Sun and Lakes. I no longer have to use Wild Turkey as a landmark to find home. Okay. My concern is, first of all, Wally, welcome aboard, and I hope you don't take this as a reflection of what I'm saying, because it's nothing against you personally, okay?
But it soon will be.
I think we need to take a look at when we start filling the vacancy. I got this one document. It says Section 9-107, filling vacancies. At the bottom of it, it's letter D. If any vacancy occurs in a seat occupied by a supervisor elected by qualified electors, remaining members of the board of supervisors shall within 45 days after the vacancy occurs appoint a person who would be eligible to hold the office of the unexpired term. My question is, where did that come from? Now, at the bottom of this segment, it shows...
Let me answer that.
Okay.
That's in our charter. That's set policy and procedure.
Well, if it's in our charter, the charter would be Charter Ordinance 774-4. Yeah. This does not include qualified electors, because at that time we did not have the qualified electors. All we had was landowners, supervisors, and there were 5 of them. So this was not in there.
Well,
it only addressed that to land supervisors.
I'm going to let our attorney respond to that.
Okay, now let me ask.
I'm not sure where you're going with that.
All right, there's another section here that says ordinance number 02-03. Now, I haven't been able to find that, but if I could get a copy of that, I would appreciate that. Maybe it is in there. But that 74-4 does not include qualified electors because we did not have any qualified electors
You're talking
there.
about the original part of the charter, yeah, but we've had, I don't know.
No, we only had landowner supervisors.
We've had
all 5.
We've had amendments.
Huh?
We've
Well,
had
then, but
amendments
then
to
that was not in there.
Are you unhappy with the current process?
Well, no, I think some things should be added to it. I think some things should be added to it. I think, first of all, when you appoint somebody, I hope this gentleman, if you appointed him to this position, that he's going to run for the election. If he's going to run for this election coming up, then I think you should somewhere include that he qualifies for the Florida election codes.
Can't do that. You can't do that because we have a very specific role in this situation that we have an empty seat to fulfill. If it occurred, for example, in December rather than in the spring, if you applied that to it, we'd be waiting 5 or 6 months before we could even move on it. So those two things are not joined at the hip.
Well, you included into your qualifications back when you have section where you're talking about the supervisors, okay, you have that as part of the qualifications, that they be part of the election code. That's included in there. Why can't it be included for the filling of why can't it be included in the qualifications of filling a vacancy? I'm just asking the question.
I don't have the answer today, but let me describe to you.
That's an answer for our attorney.
I'm not entirely sure what the question is. Is he asking why it doesn't say specifically under 109-102 sub D or 107 sub D? What's the actual? What are you asking?
Well, where I'm going from is this handout that I got from you. It says Division 2. We're talking about Board of Supervisors. In the qualifications of the Board of Supervisors, you require that a supervisor qualified for the Florida Election Code. When you go to appoint the person to fill that seat, that is not required of him. So my question is this, I hope that this gentleman would probably be running when election time comes up. Why wouldn't he have that qualification in his belt so that he can run for a future election?
This qualification period is 1 week in June, and if you're back in September, then you're talking 9 months out. Rusty, that just doesn't coordinate.
Okay. The other part of this thing that I have a question about is...
Well, look, we can't answer this on the fly. If this is a concern in terms of are we properly structured to do what we're supposed to be doing, then I would suggest that you phrase that in a detailed question to the district and let us address it.
All right. My main concern is really where did you get that piece of information to be put in here and what was the basis for this? That's all I'm concerned.
I think it's both in the policy manual and in the
I would like to see
part of the ordinance.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
The qualifying paragraph that he's speaking of is in the county ordinance, okay? The county ordinance since 1974 has been amended. The district part of the county ordinance has been amended multiple times since 1974.
But Tanya, just to be clear, when you say county ordinance, you're talking about that portion that's our charter.
That's our charter, and it's been amended multiple times over the years, and it is available online for free for the public to look at under municode.com. And if you type in Highlands County Code of Ordinances, and I think it's Article 9, Chapter 5, Sun and Lake's charter is there, and every amendment that has occurred since 1974 is available for your review on the website, municode.com, Highlands County. And it'll give you all the subsections, all the code sections that were amended for all the issues that we're talking about today, from code enforcement to voting requirements to purchasing.
Let me see.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, meeting's adjourned. Wasn't that fun?
Hey.
About 6 months. I just wrote it. That was one of our Congratulations.